Alright guys, BLM here back with a new video, and in this video we're back with another review of another challenge season, this time talking about the challenge All-Stars Rivals. And truth be told, I was actually very much considering not doing this video. I was very much considering not covering Challenge All-Stars anymore. However, a major reason why I end up doing this video here is largely because of how much hype there was with this season. The fact that this felt like a season that was going to be a bit more old school feeling, and now with the season being finished, I think we 100% got that. This is actually a season that I thought was a genuinely good challenge season, something that is kind of rare in the modern day, especially from the mainline series, to where while recent All-Star seasons have had sprinkles of good content here and there, I feel like this season, to me, really popped and really just again showed the strengths of the All-Stars format. For a while, it's a season that definitely took a little bit to ramp up. I think by the end, this ends up being a pretty fun season with, again, a lot of drama, interesting gameplay, and a really fun overall story, to where, again, I really end up enjoying All-Stars Rivals here. But again, like all my other reviews, I'll be running through the season from beginning to end, talking about my opinions along the way. So let's start off with the premiere, which starts off with us seeing a lot of flashbacks to some of the biggest fights in challenge history, with many of them involving people that just aren't on the season. So it's like, why are we seeing these? But also here we do end up seeing Ashley and Bananas moments of them stealing their money from their partners, which I wonder if that will become relevant. But obviously this all is the lead up to them reintroducing a classic twist. The fact that you have to work with your biggest enemy, 13 pairs of the greatest rivalries, surely. But overall, again, really cool to see the Rivals theme be brought back to the challenge. Obviously very classic, it being utilized 3 times in the past, working out pretty well 2 of those times. And again, technically was used more, just not officially labeled Rivals. But still, again, I think having these like old school themes being utilized for the All-Star series, again, I think is a really cool idea. And I think it's something that if they do continue All-Stars, I hope they continue down the road. I think that's just a cool callback. Well, also, again, just the Rivals theme is just, again, a really good theme. Now, the Rivals that they brought back, questionable. With, again, definitely some of the cast here being some very strange picks, especially for All-Stars in particular, though. Also beyond that, there's a bit of a weird breakdown with this cast. The fact that there are way more women on this cast than men, which, to be fair, not really a criticism, though it does lead into the criticism that I have that some of these pairings are comprising of same-gendered players, some are mixed-gendered. It's the same criticism I have of how they handled this twist back in Final Reckoning. I think that just further adds this like level of inconsistency here between teams that, while, again, we do obviously see a lot of the challenges moving forward be not super physical, which again is kind of a trope of All-Stars at this point. I think it leads to a lot of like pretty unfair matchups here. Either way, the teams end up arriving at the jungle, which again, also cool callback there, where we see them pretend to be shocked that it's the rival season, with getting a montage of everyone's reactions, even though they already knew that, as this was spoiled before they flew out, so kind of dumb. But either way, TJ ends up calling down the teams one by one, which I did really like this as a way to introduce each of the dynamics, and obviously allows for me to talk about each of these teams pretty easily here. The first person we see go down ends up being Steve, who ends up being paired with Adam, because he stole his star in All-Stars 4, which I do find this rivalry so funny, because it's one where, again, you can clearly tell Steve had no clue why they were being paired up, where, again, this was filmed before All-Stars 4 had finished airing, so Steve had not seen all these insane confessionals that Adam would give against him, to where, again, it ends up being really funny across the season how little Steve ends up caring about any of this, all while Adam is still super bitter. Obviously, also, again, Adam and Steve end up being a really overpowered team here. So while there are other teams I think would be naturally more overpowered in a typical challenge season, I feel like for something like Challenge All-Stars in particular, again, these sort of challenges that, again, are not like the most physical that you're going to see like on the mainline show, but again, are things that feel a little bit more carnival gamey. Again, that is something that Adam and Steve really excel at. For obviously, they were major frontrunners right from the beginning here, but then we get introduced to Frank, who's come back after 12 years, and we also get a flashback to him just being kind of insane when he was younger. And in general, I was so happy to see Frank back on the show. I mean, Frank is someone that I really loved as a TV presence back in the day. Obviously, again, very questionable actions, but someone that I was very excited to see him back, and he really did not disappoint. I really feel like he becomes really the star of this season, with him, again, clearly just growing since his last appearance. The fact that he comes back saying he wants to prove he's not fueled by ego and insecurity, and while obviously there are still points where he does get frustrated, I did feel like we saw a lot of growth from Frank here, but not in a spot where it sapped his entertainment, to where he still provided a lot for the show. And here we do end up seeing him be paired up with Sam, who he obviously won in Battle of the Seasons with, but obviously, again, still not a great partner. But also Sam, again, interesting to see back here as well. who hadn't been on the show since Battle of the Seasons, only her second season, where, again, a really interesting dynamic to see here, again, considering, again, Frank was, like, yelling at Sam in the final, and again, that obviously gets a lot of callbacks here. And again, it ends up being a really endearing relationship to see them really repair their relationship over the course of this season, though at the same time, I do feel like it kind of sucks for Frank. Where again, Sam is obviously somebody that would typically struggle to win a challenge season, and Frank being paired up with her is essentially a death sentence at this point, which again happens to a couple other pairings as well, where again, that's kind of the bad aspect of the Rivals format, is that sometimes you just get very unlucky with who your partner is. And I feel like for Frank in particular in this spot, where again, I was so excited to see Frank back, to see him being paired up with Sam here, and again, not having that great of a chance to win from the very offset, again, was a bit disappointing to see. But either way, then we get to see Ashley Kay back on the show, which, fine. But again, she's paired up with Dario because they're exes. Which, okay. I mean, sure. I guess that's a rivalry. And again, Dario's another one that, again, seemed to have developed over time. Again, talks about how he recognized that he was a dirtbag, and there's clearly still some attraction between the two, to where, again, I thought they were going to eventually get back together, though obviously that doesn't really end up happening. But anyway, we also then get a segment about Ashley M's return, where she'd obviously been missing since Spice Lights and Allies. And again, this is kind of the typical challenge trope at this point, is to kind of suspend a person after some questionable behavior, but then give them a test run on a spin-off series before putting them back on the mainline show. And again, that's exactly what happens with Ashley here. Though again, like Frank, she ends up being paired up with Anissa, a pretty bad partner. And it's about where it doesn't even make sense why she's paired up with Anissa. Obviously, again, Ashley has had her issues with Anissa, but I don't feel like it's ever been to the point where I'll be like, oh my god, that great rivalry between Anissa and Ashley, to where, again, this is definitely the start of the more questionable rivalries here, and one that felt like they were pretty doomed from the start. But then we get to Sylvia, who talks about being a new mom, and that she's coming for Kellyanne. And what do you know? She gets paired up with Kellyanne. Never would have guessed that. There again, at least a genuine rivalry. Mind you, again, it is kind of weird because on All Stars 3, a lot more of Kellyanne's ire was directed towards Kayla. To where obviously Kellyanne would have been the better rivalry. But again, Kelly and Sylvia also perfectly fine here. We're one of the stronger female teams. Again, it was still a spot where they were not particularly poised well here. And then we then get to see Nicole Zanata back, thank God, paired up with Melissa. Why is Melissa on All Stars? Which, to be fair, I mean, will get worse coming up. Where at least Melissa was from an original MTV show. To while it is weird that we're now transitioning to the point where the internationals are getting onto All Stars. I actually don't feel like Melissa's the most egregious pick here. Now, again, her paired up with Nicole, a little questionable. Or again, I guess they're exes. But again, did they really have that much of a rivalry? Also, beyond that, we also get the weird content from Nicole that continues her trajectory of being a cheater, where we get content about how she has a girlfriend that's not going to be happy about this. It says that if you put a blonde bombshell in front of her, something's going to happen, where we then get her, again, just really objectifying Melissa in a weird way on the show. That, again, not a great look. But either way, we then get to the return of Nany, who, again, missed on 2 flagship seasons. She's back here for All Stars after missing out on Challenge 40, which, why'd she skip on Challenge 40? But again, she talks about she's never won, and she's back for first place, which she surely won't say over and over again. And she also talks about she needs the money to plan her wedding with Casey, which, that's kind of funny. But she ends up being paired up here with Turbo. Play with a girl's heart. Which, it's a real rivalry. Again, we obviously see them getting into massive fights on Ride or Dies. She takes him out. And Turbo comes in here talking about how he wants revenge against Nany. So again, a fair rivalry. But also, why on All Stars? Again, the fact that Turbo is on All Stars is, again, getting to the more egregious picks here, where while Turbo is someone that I think is still fine enough TV, I'm not opposed to seeing Turbo back. I do think having him on All Stars in a spot where he just debuted around 5 years before this film, then, again, has no connection to, like, the MTV universe before that, where, again, I do think Turbo being here is pretty egregious, but again, it'll get worse. But also, I do feel like it's very clear that Turbo is here again because they wanted a strong partner for Nany. I do feel like this is a season that did feel like they were giving some of their favorites some stronger pairings, which to be fair is always a trend of rival seasons. But and it felt like with Nany here in particular, again, Turbo was like one of the best partners they could have given her, which again will surely work out for her. Next up, we see Beth be paired up with Jonna, as expected. Obviously, calling back to All Stars 3, where Jonna says that she tried to ruin my life and says it was attempted murder, which is kind of an insane thing to say. But and here we see Beth not be remorseful purposeful at all throughout all this. And we end up seeing Janae, obviously, again, in a spot where she knows that she's going to lose at this point. I mean, paired up with Beth here is clearly a death sentence. So we see her being emotional, and obviously the show tries to portray it as, oh, she's emotional because she's paired with Beth, this person that she has such a hostile relationship with, when I think it's very clear she's crying because she knows that she's wasting her time at this point and that she has no chance of winning. Though, again, in terms of rivalry, at least this is a fair rivalry. Janae generally hates her, so at least there's that. But anyway, then we get to the return of Da'Vonne, which, again, really cool to see Da'Vonne back. Now, again, questionable for All-Stars. Again, being someone from Big Brother, why is she on All-Stars? But I think if you were going to pick one of those sort of people to be on All-Stars, I feel like Da'Vonne would be my pick as somebody that, again, is very unlikely to want to do the flagship show again and is a big enough get to where, like, I'm kind of fine with her on All-Stars, even though, again, she kind of breaks all the other rulings that I would typically follow. Though I will say, she does talk about how she used to be the pop-off queen and now she's rededicated herself to God. And in general, she does end up getting a much quieter edit on this season than I would have expected, which kind of felt like a little bit of a waste of a Da'Vonne return. But again, she ends up being paired up with Shane, which, again, perfect rivalry there. Again, obviously had a feud during Final Reckoning, with Shane also being a really cool return here. Again, another one that seemed to be on a bit of a hiatus. Yeah, again, finally back on the show. Again, really happy to see him back here. But then we get to the more questionable picks on the board. We get Amber Berzotra. Why is she on All-Stars? Or again, I like Amber B, but also should not be on All-Stars. But again, up to this point, the people that have been questionable picks at least had like reasonable partners. Again, Da'Vonne was with Shane. Turbo was with Nany. Melissa was with Nicole. Again, these people that, again, feel more All-Star caliber. Here, we have Amber B being paired with Fessy. Why are they on the show? Where, again, this is what actually generally makes no sense at this point. Where at least the other ones I get excused a bit more. Like, Amber B and Fessy being here is just kind of insane. Both of which, again, not debuting until the mid to late 30s of the challenge. Both coming from Big Brother. Again, really bad that they're here. And also a very powerful team that actually were my winner picks coming into the season. Though, again, this is the first time we do end up seeing Amber on the show since she's had a kid. So, again, that adds another, like, dynamic there. But, again, still a spot where, like, why is she on All-Stars? But either way, we then cut to the next pair, Big T and Corey. Which also, what the fuck? Where I think this is the most egregious of them all. I mean, the fact that Corey is on the show here. Again, he debuted in Challenge 37. Big T debuted in Challenge 34. Again, both of these being very recent picks. Again, neither of them having any connection to MTV originally. And again, I like Big T. I like Corey. But why are you on All-Stars? This is the most egregious pick of them all. Again, at least they are like real rivalries here. Again, these are like feuds that happen on the show. So at least they make sense in that light. But again, obviously just make no sense for All-Stars in particular. Though again, at least in comparison to Amber B and Fessy, at least they feel like a more balanced team, where Amber B and Fessy just feel like a team that would dominate a season like this, where again Corey and Big T feel more in line of kind of the average team that you would see here. But then we get the final pairing introduced here, that being Devin, who I was shocked to see back here because he said he was going to take a break after 40. Yet again, he's in All-Stars 5, and he's paired up with Leroy. Was this a real rivalry? Again, I had no memory of any of this happening on Double Agents before they mentioned it on Challenge 40. Yeah, it felt very clear this is just their excuse to have them paired together. Again, I think it's a spot like Nany. They wanted to give Leroy a strong partner. Devin, again, while not the strongest partner in the world, again, is definitely a decent partner here, especially amongst this field, to where, again, I think Leroy and Devin are another ones that, again, you would expect to be a serious winner contender here. And again, even they seem to think that as well. But with that, we see one player being left at the starting line, that person being Katie, where Katie's back after a kind of bad showing on Challenge 40, but her partner hasn't arrived yet. Though we do end up obviously later revealing at the first daily that her partner is Veronica, which, yeah, that's fine. Again, Katie, Veronica, really legendary rivalry for the show. Makes a lot of sense that they're paired up here. Again, feels very underpowered. A team that I'm personally shocked they made it as far as they did. Though, again, that comes down to some pretty strong political play from them, which we'll talk about. But really, in general, again, cool partnership. One that felt like, again, they didn't really have much of a chance on the show. But anyway, following this, we do get their rival at their house for the season, which is this really cool, like, vertical, like, hotel building that I thought was a very unique aesthetic. But again, we get some focus around some of the rivalries. Beth and Janae end up talking with, again, Beth not really owning up to anything here, saying that you are blowing up my game, so I'm blowing up yours. And we leave this conversation of Beth like gloating confession about how great of a team they are and how they squashed their beef, only for Janae to clearly still be annoyed at her. Oh, we also get a lot of content here revolving around Nany and her, I mean, this fun dichotomy of Turbo and the fact that we see her first being annoyed while trying to look for a room, while Turbo sitting on the hammock outside eating blueberries. And Turbo Getting his typical like weird content, talking about how people are strange and how the inside's too cold, so he has to be outside. Where we do see Nany eventually approaching Turbo and trying to have a conversation here, only for her to tell her that he doesn't feel good and just talk later. Only for her to force the convo here, where it's another one that doesn't particularly go too great, though it is weird considering like we don't really get too much about them actually working out their relationship. They just end up being friends again by the end of the season. But as again, we do end this conversation with Turbo still saying that he doesn't need Nany in this game. But anyway, we get to the first daily where the top 4 teams here end up getting stars, aka a ticket to the final. Again, similar thing to what we did in All Stars 4, though obviously now of pairs instead of individuals, though also not working as well as that previous format due to some later rule changes that we'll talk about. But again, this ends up being the only challenge we get in the premiere here, one that doesn't even factor into the first elimination of the season, just simply one that divvies out the stars, where we see them having to race the 3 checkpoints and do, again, very challenge all-starsy sort of tasks, like transferring mud to fill a bucket, then transferring ice with tongs, and then have to like balance 4 balls on a gurney while collecting sandbags. Again, the typical style of all-star challenges we've seen recently. Again, not these very overtly physical challenges you see in the mainline show, but again, definitely more toned down than that. But again, things that feel more old school. So where it does feel in line of what you would see in, again, the middle school of the challenge. But Adam and Steve end up winning this challenge, which again, we'll be hearing a lot on this season, with Adam saying that this is why Steve shouldn't have taken my star, which it's like, isn't this showing why he should take your star? The fact that you were this good of a competitor, and also the fact that that led to you being paired up together on Rivals in a spot where you're in first. But either way, Leroy and Devin end up coming in seconds, with Leroy getting the gloat here about being happy to not come in first, as now Adam and Steve have the big targets on their backs and have to go. Obviously, Adam and Steve have these massive bullseyes on them from the very beginning. All we see, surprisingly, Ashley K and Dario come in third, which was, again, not expected, especially considering we see Fessy and Amber have the initial lead, yet somehow just fall out of it by the end. Oh, we see other teams struggling, like obviously like Beth and John A being in last. Oh, Franken's being frustrated because Sam is out of breath right away. But again, does show development here and him not freaking out on her. Again, clearly being frustrated, but again, recognize the fact that he has to make sure his partner also doesn't quit the game. But we end up seeing Big T and Corey do surprisingly well here, though end up coming up short by the very end to Nany and Turbo. With Turbo even ending up doing a portion here kind of by himself, which is like, I'm surprised that was allowed. But anyway, we end the episode with a return to the house where we do get a lot of talk here about what they would do if they were offered that they could steal their money from their partner, with Adam saying that he can't trust Steve and might have to be cutthroat, which, I wonder if that's some sort of setup. But we end up weirdly ending this episode, Nany talking about Turbo, that he's the hardest partner she's ever had to deal with, and he's a loose cannon, which we like flash forward to their fight. That's like episodes from now, which again, just a very strange and abrupt ending to this episode, where something I did actually kind of like about this season is that they do play around with when to end the episode, but not in a way that feels just completely disjointed, where that's something criticized of old school challenge that just feels like they end the episode on just random points, where it feels like here it kind of ends on the first segment in the house after the last challenge of the episode, which again feels a little bit more structured in that way, to where again I kind of like them playing around with that, even though some of the endings to these episodes felt very strange. But either way, we get to episode 2, where we start off with a lot of talk about how they can't strategize because they don't know the format yet. Which, again, like, why not just tell them the format? But we get more, like, odd couple content between Adam and Steve, with obviously that setting them up going in. Oh, well, we see Amber get personal content here about being here for her daughter, and her and Fessy have put things aside for the win. I wonder if that'll matter. Oh, we get weird Nicole content of her making fun of Beth jeans that are 30 years old, which she wore on early challenge seasons, which is kind of insane, actually. But again, it does lead to Melissa talking about how Nicole's a big mouth and she's gonna put her foot in it, which, again, I wonder if that's set up. Anyway, we get to the daily where we finally learn the format. Learning that winning the daily keeps you safe along with your star, again, as expected. Though beyond that, one rival pair will be voted in by the house, while the winners get to pick any other team to go into the jungle. Though, again, like we've seen in recent seasons, if you don't have a star yourself, you can nominate yourself. Though, again, almost no one will ever do that. Or if you don't have a star, you can steal a star from those that didn't win the challenge. And it ends up being a format here that I don't love. I do feel like this is one that we see the direct ramifications of it right away. The fact that there's no real downsides to losing, as there's no punishment for coming in last, which is, again, lame, as that means that there's no incentive for you to try in the challenge, especially in a spot where you have these star holders at these big targets that are likely to be thrown into elimination anyway. So again, if you're in a spot where you don't have a star and you don't think you're going to be voted in, then you really have no incentive to try. as we see coming into a heights challenge here as the first challenge, where they have to grab 4 flags off the top of a building. And if your rival falls, then you fall too, where obviously we end up seeing Fessy and Amber do ridiculously well here. Again, a challenge that's essentially built for them. Again, both of which being long-limbed, and again, just makes it very easy for them to get all these flags. And again, considering only first place ends up mattering here, we see everyone decide to not really try as they're all terrified of heights. And again, why are you going to do this when you're not going to win anyway? Which again, just ends up being kind of lame here. Though we end up seeing Kellyanne loving heights and once again get personal content about her animal rescue. Oh, all we get Sylvia obviously freaking out, leading to them being DQ'd, with Kellyanne getting pissed and Sylvia calling her a princess, which like isn't that kind of the opposite? But either way, Anissa also is up here as well, with TJ being so annoyed at this, which was so funny to see, just yelling at her to just get 1 flag and tells her you're better than this, where again, all that was really funny. We also get Beth freaking out, as you would kind of expect, and quitting, where we see John A ending up being a pretty supportive partner here to her face, only to then scold her about why is she here in confessional, which fair. I'll always see again like Shane Devon quit, Corey and T quit, Katie quits as expected. And again, it's just funny to see how increasingly annoyed TJ gets person after person here. But obviously we end up seeing Adam and Steve do well here, with again just continuing to prop them up as threats, where they end up actually having to actively jump off the building to get the final flag, with again really over the top music playing. But ultimately it does end up starting to rain, making it very difficult to obviously finish the challenge during the day here, with TJ saying it's been a clusterfuck of a day, to which 3 teams didn't get to go here, and says that this is an unprecedented moment, that they're now given the choice to compete tomorrow or not compete at all, which is again a ramification of this format, as again it would be completely unfair if they were allowed to not compete if there was some sort of punishment for losing, but because there isn't, they just get the choice, which is also kind of not a choice. Jordan obviously knew them end up deciding to compete, which is actually kind of an advantage for them in this spot. And again, the teams like Nani and Turbo and Roy and Devin don't have to show how big of threats they are here. Also, again, for someone like Melissa, who hadn't been able to go yet and was freaking out, this obviously allows her to get out of being ridiculed here. But also, again, I doubt this was a real choice. Again, were they able to book the place for an extra day because of the challenge? Again, I don't know. But even then, I doubt production actively wanted to film here for an extra day, to where I would assume that they were kind of wanting them to agree to not compete here. And again, at the end of the day, it's like Fessy and Amber were going to win anyway. It's kind of just an irrelevant choice. But right away, we do see Frank again instantly start playing the game very hard here, putting the targets onto Adam and Steve as these two that don't really have that many connections, saying that him and Sam are obviously not going to do particularly well in the challenges, to which they have to come and play the strategic game, where yeah, I really did like this like shift in Frank here to be this kind of mastermind of the season, him really trying to play from behind the scenes, where while obviously eventually gets caught. I did think it was an interesting dynamic to bring to the show here. Again, this very like Big Brother style of gameplay. Along the way, we see Nicole saying that she can't vote for Adam and Steve as her and Adam are close, which comes out of left field. I feel like we never saw that relationship at all in All Stars 4. But either way, Amber ends up being worried that Nicole's going to run her mouth, only for Amber to be the one to run her mouth and tell Veronica about this plan, despite the fact that Katie is longtime friends of Adam and Steve. Obviously, they were on the same Road Rules season, to where obviously they were going to be working together, to where, again, who would have guessed it? Veronica tells Adam and Steve that they're going in, leading to Adam starting to campaign for himself, going to Fessy, saying that he wants to take out the snake and Frank and Sam, but that doesn't really go anywhere. But obviously this alerts Amber to the fact that someone must have told Adam and Steve, and she instantly thinks it's Nicole, saying, I'm not dumb, and Nicole's messy and needs to take responsibility, which does seemingly put a bullseye into Nicole and Melissa's back, though Amber doesn't end up going through with it anyway, because she says that she doesn't want to vote in Melissa as a mother, even though she votes in 2 mothers, so that's something. Anyway, we get to the house vote, where we do see TJ leading these sequences, which was very weird to see TJ essentially like leading like a pseudo-tribal setting, just kind of sucking at it. But either way, each team gets 1 vote, which they have to agree on their vote, to where I do think it's, again, dumb that this vote is done in public and a spot where people can shift their votes based on who they've previously seen. Again, it's kind of insane that the challenge has been going on for this long and still is such a broken voting system. But almost everyone ends up voting for Adam and Steve, first of many times, which did lead to some stagnant gameplay early on in the season. Again, probably the main criticism of the early portion of the season is the fact that it was just really Adam and Steve getting voted in over and over and over again. And while they obviously persevered through it, again, it did get a bit redundant, though. When it comes to Fessy and Amber's decision, we see Fessy saying that he's letting Amber take the lead, only for him to then take the lead in the strategy coming into the vote, saying that they need to not get blood in their hands. So we get to the jungle, where Fessy ends up voting in Beth and John A, which, I mean, yeah, I guess no one's going to be that upset at you. But we do get a lot of shock from the other teams, with this seemingly coming off as a surprise. And obviously, it is a surprise from an editing perspective as well, where again, Beth and Johnny were just never mentioned as targets here, with again, this being edited as this big reveal. He's essentially sending them to their doom, again, saying them against Adam and Steve, one of the strongest teams. Fessy again saying that he wants to keep his hands clear, which I actually don't hate the strategy from Fessy. So while it can be looked at as a very weak move, I do think keeping around Adam and Steve as these shields for them is not the worst play in the world here, especially if you're able to build some sort of rapport with them, to where in the world where they win a challenge, they don't put you in. Also, he has no real connective tissue to Beth and Jonna, and I do think it starts this like culture of not voting in these like big threats. I actually don't hate this move from Fessy, even though again, obviously it doesn't work to their favor by the end, but we do get to the elimination, which has them having to roll dice to determine what sections of a tube they have to put poles into, and then have to have both members fit into that section of the tube, and then do this 5 times. Again, a very weird challenge here. The one that obviously is mostly equitable. I mean, there's still physical portions to running in and out of the tube. And there actually are disadvantages here for Adam and Steve. Again, these bigger guys, where it's obviously harder for them to fit both of them into this tube in comparison to Beth and Jonna. But ultimately, it does end up being pretty back and forth here, which again shows how equitable it is, considering again, it's Beth as one of the competitors here. But either way, Adam and Steve ultimately end up winning. Tori lose Beth and Jonna. But as I mentioned before, again, it's not the episode just yet, as we get another segment following this. First seeing Beth and Jonna packing at the house, which was very strange to see here, but it allows for them to obviously have this like resolution for these pairs, which was nice to see, even though really there's not much resolution here. As, again, Beth talks about how their relationship's a complete 180 and they're friends now, only for Jonna to say that she never wants to see her again. But we actually do end the episode ultimately on a segment around Sylvia and Kellyanne. They're obviously playing off of that previous content during the daily. We see Sylvia being upset at Kellyanne for being condescending, and Kelly being upset that if you're not going to try, then I would be doing better things at home. And again, this leads to this weird bickering back and forth. But I did feel like Sylvia coming off on a massive high horse here, talking about how I have a family and all you have is dogs. Which was a great look here. But again, a pretty big fight between the two here. Again, getting some drama on Modern Challenge. That's something. But again, interesting way to end the episode on a big fight that they end up kind of doing again the following episode, with it following the exact same structure of showing the team that would later be eliminated the following episode have a big fight at the end of the penultimate episode, which was very strange. But either way, we end up losing Beth and Jonna, and again, it was just kind of sad to see Jonna here being doomed to fail from the very start, where had she been given a competent partner, she obviously would have been a big threat to win the season, though again with Beth, again, it was just kind of a non-starter, and they didn't really get much to do on the season. Really all their content revolved around them trying to repair their relationship, which really just went nowhere, and it really just led to like Beth coming off as a bit delusional across the season. But also a spot where I do question like why Beth is on the challenge anymore, where again, I've loved Beth as a character. I was very happy to see her back on some of these previous All-Star seasons. I think I'm kind of at the point now where I'm kind of over it. I feel like she's not really bringing anything to the competitive nature of the show. And really, she just feels like fodder on most seasons that she comes into, to where, again, I would much rather see Beth on some of these other shows. Again, House of Villains, Traitors. Again, these other shows I think are definitely a lot more suited towards Beth's current skill set than the Challenge All-Stars, where it didn't really bring much here. But then we got to episode 3, where we continue off with more Sylvia Kellyanne content, with Sylvia talking to Shane, telling him that Kellyanne needed to hear it. We do get the setup of the Lavender ladies here, which again, nice to see a lot of them back here. Again, we see Shane, Sylvia, Ashley on this season. Sad that didn't really matter. But again, Sylvia and Kellyanne end up eventually talking it out, having a very vulnerable conversation here, talking about their insecurities and talking about how they were like envious of each other. And at the end, talking about how they now look at each other as equals. So good for them. Anyway, we get to the daily, which has them transferring balls through an obstacle course and then have to solve a puzzle at the end, where we do get some funny moments here from like Melissa not understanding what Nicole is saying, and leading to Nicole being upset at Melissa for not understanding what she's saying. Oh, we also have Sam giving a decent performance at the beginning here, and Frank saying he's proud, only for her to get exhausted by the end anyway. Also, we end up seeing Anissa be scared to do the cargo wall after having fallen off in Spice Lies and Allies, which got her DQ'd, which leads to Ashley being annoyed at her, with Ashley also having this like similar predicament to Frank, talking about how she can't freak out on Anissa, as doesn't help their partnership here. But also we get content here from Devin talking about Leroy's always the bridesmaid, never the bride. He's gonna drag Leroy to the win here. Which, I mean, yeah, I think that's what producers wanted. But either way, they do end up winning this challenge at least. Yes, but we do see that Adam was sick throughout this challenge and was just clearly out of it throughout this entire episode. And it's with Adam throwing up and says he can't breathe, just resting up, which allows for Steve to be the narrator for the duo for this episode, which is kind of rare. But it does lead to a lot of weird content, which really we get a lot of on this season, about how Steve says that they need to respect their elders. like really propping up just how old Adam and Steve are when it's like that old. Like, you're not that much older than the rest of the cast. So while this is a, again, young All-Stars cast, it's not like you're that much older than the majority of them. But we do see them debate over whether or not to try to make a deal here and offer up their star, which they don't do. They don't make a deal at all. Anyway, we get to the house vote where Adam does really try to play into the sympathy card here and asks if anyone will stand up for them. And no one does, or everyone votes him, Adam and Steve again. But we do end up seeing after this that Adam does try to campaign a bit here to Devin, trying to get him to throw in Frank and Sam once again. With Frank again getting this very villainous content here that was really fun to see here. Him talking about how he doesn't care about anybody but him and his partner, and he wants to manipulate relationships, and he can't wait to throw you in and laugh. But it also does lead to Frank being nervous here about being thrown in, as obviously in that spot wouldn't be a great position to be in. But also, we do end up getting some focus around Aneesa with her bonding with Sam, and then bonding over being underestimated. Oh, we also see her talking with Leroy about how she works out well off the show, but not well on the show, and that she's all in on playing socially. Only for Ashley to be annoyed here, being upset at how she's not working and just making friends, and that's her whole game. Which, I mean, to be fair to Aneesa, I do feel like it does work out for longevity most of the time. Do I actually feel like that's something that Ashley could work on a bit, is her social game? But then we get to the jungle, where we once again get a surprise vote, where Leroy and Devin vote in Kellyanne and Sylvia. So we got their personal content earlier, that makes sense why they would be thrown in, but really outside that, this is not explained at all up to this point, where we get this like genius like flashback of like Frank having made a deal with Devin and Leroy, saying that he can manipulate their egos. It really gets shown as them like making the wrong move here, though. I realistically actually don't even think this makes that big of a difference for Devin and Leroy, where I think realistically, I think they're allied with all the other stronger teams, where I don't think it really behooves them to throw any of them in, to where in the debate between Frank and Sam and Kellyanne and Sylvia, I don't think there's really a big difference there. I don't think either of them have particularly close connections to any of those duos, to where, again, if you can at least get a deal out of Frank and Sam, then well, obviously they're very likely to break it. At least, again, have something there. That's where I think Kellyanne and Sylvia probably do better in a final than Frank and Sam. Again, I do feel like this is not actually the incorrect call, especially in a spot where, again, they continue to want Adam and Steve around as these big shields for them, which, again, ends up being effective initially. Again, the challenge itself ends up being them having to solve a puzzle while, like, a spool of rope is dropping. The longer you take, the more rope you have to hold on to, where you ultimately win by carrying the unspooled rope for 5 minutes. Again, a very weird and very lame challenge here. One that really comes down to just how quickly can you solve the puzzle, as it's not particularly likely you're going to drop your rope, especially in a spot where you do the puzzle quick enough, to where all this is just kind of lame and just really boring, to where, again, it's an easy Steve and Adam win. Though we have Kellyanne and Sylvia leaving as friends now, where they hug in confessional, so good for them. But again, the episode ends, as I said, with the Aneesa-Ashley conflict here, with Aneesa joking around about Ashley being a redneck, with Ashley obviously taking offense to that, and which obviously I don't think Aneesa had much like ill intent through this. Again, she was clearly joking, but obviously just did not realize that Ashley would not take the joke well. Right, also get a big fight between the two here, with Ashley just really letting out her frustrations here about how she can't win with Aneesa, and Aneesa's gonna lose it for them, which is kind of funny considering what ultimately happens. But again, a decent enough fight here, and not as good as the Kellyanne and Sylvia one, but again, just another explosive way to end the episode. But then again, we lose Kellyanne and Sylvia, and they were fine on this season, and again, they end up living up to this rivals theme here, and them being able to actually work together by the end, but obviously, again, not particularly long for the game. And I do think a spot where, again, they kind of just get sniped out here. I didn't really feel like they did like that much wrong, in a spot where, had they been able to make it to a final, I actually feel like they're actually in a pretty decent enough spot, with both being, again, two of the stronger female competitors on the board here, to where I did feel like them getting taken out this early was a little bit of a surprise, especially over certain other teams that we'll talk about. But anyway, we get to episode 4, where we start off with Ashley talking to her boyfriend, and really finally being annoyed at him, again, airing out frustrations with Aneesa once again, and we get this funny moment at the end of her boyfriend saying, "I love you," and Ashley says, "I don't give a fuck that you love me." But again, like the previous episode, we get Aneesa and Ashley talking it out, and Aneesa saying that she could do well in the final with Ashley, which surely. But I'll say this was definitely the episode where it really did feel like this was a slow point for the season. An episode that felt very derivative of the previous episode, with not really much going for it. But we also get some personal content here for Frank, him talking to his husband, and again, getting good personal content here, again, showing his development as well. So again, this is the style of content that you would typically get before you go into elimination or win some sort of challenge. That doesn't end up happening with Frank here, which again made it even more clear that Frank was such a major pillar of this season. Oh, we then end up seeing Veronica throw an 80s party, saying that most of you weren't alive during the 80s, which is kind of sad for an all-star season. Where it is also funny that Steve, one of the only people that was alive in the 80s, ends up sleeping during the party. So that's also something. But either way, we see Aneesa and Sam hook up. So good for them. Oh, we also get focused around Sam and Devin's friendship, which doesn't matter in this episode, where again, I felt like they were very much like setting things up for the following episode where things actually get good. Anyway, we get the daily. Again, more of a typical modern daily of them having to get on the top of a truck and push their partner to grab rings. Though they do actually make a tangible tiebreaker this time of them having bonus rings that they could grab that act as a tiebreaker, which again felt better than some of the other like more arbitrary like time-based things they've done in the past. But again, the typical team struggle here. And Frank and Sam, Aneesa, Ashley, Katie, Veronica all do pretty awfully. We also get some weird content about like Corey wanting to win so he can throw themselves in at this point, which is like, why are you doing that? This is so early on the season. I feel like that's kind of an insane move. But we do see Adam and Steve struggling here, again being heavier and harder to throw enough momentum to get to the rings. But anyway, Devin and Leroy and Amber and Fessy end up doing really well here, with this really just being another challenge built for Amber and Fessy. Again, Amber being light and long-limbed, which allow them to get the rings pretty easily, to where they end up beating Devin and Leroy due to the bonus rings. Now, beyond that, we obviously get Adam and Steve being the very easy targets once again, to where we get some Katie content. She's finally on the show, where she says that they play too nice and that they're not good at politics. So she gives them Challenge Masterclass 101, which again felt very similar to like the CT tips on Challenge 40, yet again now for Katie, which is like, is Katie good enough to be giving away these tips? Like, I don't know if Katie's really ever had the greatest social game in the world, but also gives like very strange advice here of telling Adam that you have to mean mug them and tell them that when you come back, I'll fuck your game up, which is like very strange advice. But anyway, we get to the house vote. Adam and Steve this time just volunteer. We don't even get a vote, which I think is dumb. Now, obviously, again, they were going to be voted in anyway, but I do think you still have to go through the process. As again, what if there's a world where certain teams want this big blind side? And obviously, again, if that was the case, producers wouldn't allow them to do this. But again, that also shows their hand that this blind side is going to happen. Where why would you want to do that? So where again, I just think in general, this is such a dumb aspect of the challenge, how inconsiderate they are of the voting process. But either way, but we do see Adam campaigning to Fessy and Amber about how he wants to go against a star holder, and if he wins, he'll give them a star. Where I think it's very clear to cast assume that this was going to work like All Stars 4, or no matter who the elimination winners were, if there were stars up for grabs, that the elimination winner would be able to divvy out those stars. It was better how it functioned All Stars 4. Gave a lot more agency to the players. But again, the campaign here does have Amber and Fessy thinking about throwing Devin and Leroy in. So again, that also creates such a big enemy for you. While this is a move that I could see Fessy making back in the day, I feel like modern Fessy doesn't make big moves like this. Anyway, you get to the elimination where Fessy and Amber do end up voting in Aneesa and Ashley, which does come out of left field once again. Really no gravitas put into this, where this is a pretty big betrayal. I mean, Fessy and Aneesa do have a pretty decent relationship. I feel like Amber and Ashley have always been pretty good, to where, again, the only real foreshadowing to this was previous content of Aneesa talking about how safe she feels with Amber and Fessy. But again, it just feels so repetitive at this point, the fact that we're like literally doing this 3 times in a row, where the person getting voted in by the winning team ends up having no setup to them being voted in. It was like interesting the first time. The second time we got this like big flashback sequence, so again, that was with a little bit more gravitas. This one just came out just really dumb. So again, we get Fessy talking about how like he's doing this because Aneesa showed that he was on the bottom of her totem pole back in Ride or Dies, because I definitely remember that. But again, we get another pretty lame elimination here, one that has them split up their pair between an offensive player and a defensive player. The offensive player ends up trying to fill up their opponent's tank with water, while the defensive player tries to block the tanks with shields, which was really boring, though again, another equitable comp here, but one that Adam and Steve just again easily win, with funnily it being Ashley that cements her and Aneesa's loss by taking off her goggles midway through and proceeding to just not be able to see what she's doing. Well, I know there was talk about Ashley having quit this challenge. That's why she did it this way, which I personally don't think is what happened here, though to be fair, I would not put it past Ashley M, who has quit in the past. But it is funny that when Adam and Steve win, we see Katie talking about how she feels like a proud teacher, which like, for what? Your advice didn't work. They got voted in. And it's not like you taught them how to do well in eliminations. And it's also at least this weird moment immediately following this of like TJ telling Adam that no matter how good you are, you can't excuse those shoes with him, which is like, why was that there? But anyway, we end the episode. Again, this time not in a big fight, but instead with Frank and kind of setting up the events of the following episode, talking about how he needs to work with weaker teams like Veronica and Katie, and how he's already losing, so he has nothing to lose, which is again, not as eventful of an ending to the episode as the last couple, but still one that, again, I think really interesting to see Frank playing the game this way. Again, trying to gather up all the weaker players to do this uprise against the stronger teams, which ends up adding this interesting dynamic on this season. The fact that we don't see the same people from previous seasons kind of running the show, where again we end up seeing these again bigger names kind of end up becoming more of the underdogs, which was kind of interesting to see from them here. But either way, we ended up losing Aneesa and Ashley, and again I was happy to see Ashley make her return on this season, and I feel like she was fine. And obviously didn't get that much time to really do too much, but I just think Ashley's just such a natural challenge competitor and character, where I do like that she's finally back in the rotation. But beyond that, I think when it comes to Aneesa, again, Aneesa's just Aneesa. I think it's, again, obviously I'm over it. I think most people are over it, but they're just going to continuously ask her back. So there's not really that much of a point in complaining about her at this point. But again, I said it earlier, it's just kind of lame that Ashley was brought back just to be paired up with Aneesa and have no real shot from the very beginning. But again, at least we got a fight out of it. But overall, just kind of disappointed that that's how their trajectory ended up going. But anyway, we then get to episode 5, which is really where the season starts to pick up, where I really feel like from this point on, this ends up being a pretty strong season with some really interesting gameplay, really fun drama. Then we do start this episode off with a weird montage of the players calling their former alumni loved ones, and like Nany talking to Casey, which is again is funny now. Adam talking to Avery, which also just kind of funny how like Avery's just now full on stepmom when like they had no content together in All Stars 4. We have Amber calling Chauncey and their daughter. We have Leroy calling Cam, with his son telling him to win the money, which was surely a good sign. Devin talks to Michelle, where we get a lot of focus here on them in particular, which again just felt like the typical editing trope for the challenge that made it very likely that Devin and Leroy were going home, as why we're getting this highlighted focus on their personal relationships at this point. And that's also mixed in with the fact that we get overconfident Devin content. Him talking about how he's a stranglehold on this game and that the only issue is Adam and Steve. Where beyond that, we also get Dario finally being back on the show, talking about how close he is to Leroy, where Leroy knows his mom and brother, and how he has Leroy in his corner, which it's like, why do you do what you do? But this is a relationship that kind of comes out of nowhere. I kind of forgot how close this relationship was, where obviously it ends up playing a pretty major impact in how this episode ends up playing out. But coming into the daily, we do get some focus on Frank and Sam, with Sam trying to work out, though struggling to set up the workout equipment, but wants to prove that she can still do things, to where we get to a daily that is something that she can definitely do. It being the gross food eating challenge, with it obviously just not being a physical one that weirdly takes place in the castle that was a house for Challenge 40. But anyway, the challenge itself ends up being them being given milkshakes, and that they're asked questions about their rivals, where if they're wrong, they have to add some disgusting things to the milkshake, like ketchup and mayo, which was really lame. Like, I was like, this is a pretty bad gross food challenge, especially as like all you have to do at the end is just chug down the milkshake, where everyone has pretty much the same amount, to where it's obviously done like so quickly. And this just really comes off as a dumb challenge, where really the questions themselves don't end up really mattering. Or even the players seem to recognize this as well, where we see so many people just give throwaway answers here to avoid making enemies. Though it was funny along the way to see Turbo and everything is notional, orgasm day answer Leroy and Devin as the least trustworthy, which leads to TJ laughing, especially considering how close Nany and Leroy are. But again, the chugging portion here was just also really dumb, where they'd even like blend the milkshakes together. All the disgusting things were still at the top of the shake, and also again, you can clearly tell that everything was so melted to where it was essentially just milk by that point, where all this was so stupid. But obviously so many teams ended up finishing around the same time, to where the tiebreaker here is to weigh the glasses, I guess. That was very strange. And who would have guessed it? Frank and Sam win after getting that content earlier. I never would have guessed that. But here we obviously see Devin being happy for Frank and Sam, saying that he has a deal with them and they're going to keep him safe. Although we see Frank talk about how it's time to make big moves and throw in 2 star holders, which seemingly was a plan that pretty much the entire house was on board with, especially all the non-star holders, which again just makes sense to get stars back in the rotation. And also this way you'll learn what happens if stars are up for grabs after the elimination. But the show does give a lot of content to Dario at this point, and him putting this target onto Leroy and Devin and winding them in against Adam and Steve to put the 2 strongest teams against each other, which again is obviously so insane here for Dario. Again, to put in his number 1 ally into elimination in a spot where it didn't seem like he had that many bonds outside that, to where again, that was such a misguided play, especially when he has a star himself. I would understand it a bit more if he didn't have a star and he wanted to get the opportunity to get a star. But again, this is a spot where he already has a star. So again, this is just astronomically dumb to be targeting Leroy. Mind you, I do feel like the edit probably gave him a little bit too much credit for this, where again, it seemed like Leroy and Devin were probably going in no matter what, and it was more so a spot where he was not stopping it than anything, which, to be fair, I still think he should fight for Leroy in this spot. Again, Leroy is so beneficial for his game. So while I get the notion of, again, you want one of the two strongest teams out of the game, it is kind of insane to do that at the risk of, like, your number one ally. So I do think this is a really bad move, but it's one where I don't think you really had that much of a choice in it all. But it also ends up putting this big target on his back, where we see Corey talking about how shady he is and how he can't work with him because he now knows that he'll stab Leroy in the back, which again just further ends up being this bad precedent set for future rounds. But this does lead to Corey actually warning Devin here that he's going in, telling him that came from Dario, with obviously Devin being shocked, and him telling Leroy, leading to Leroy being shocked, with Leroy not even believing it initially, as again, it just makes no sense why he would be doing this. We do see Leroy confronting Dario about this. Dario saying that he isn't doing anything, and how am I going to control what Frank does, which, again, fair, as like, I do think Frank would have done this anyway. But also, again, still a spot where Dario's not fighting back against this. But this does lead to this big confrontation here between Devin and Dario, where Dario says it's not my job to help you, and that he's just going with the numbers. And we end up having this like big back and forth of them getting each other's faces, with Devin calling him a liar and telling him his breath stinks and that they're not in the same tax bracket, which was, again, such a ridiculous fight here, though. Again, really fun moment for the show. One that, again, very much feel like old school Devin coming out, which I'm too fair. Like, old school Devin's kind of a dick, but it does feel like recently Devin has kind of gotten a bit stale. But it was nice to see him get a bit more confrontational in this spot. But anyway, we get to the house vote, where we're doing seeing Nicole and Melissa get in a bit of trouble here, if Nicole getting caught having tried to throw Nany and Turbo's names around. Though ultimately, Adam and Steve end up being voted in once again. All Adam and Steve end up joining Katie and Veronica and voting for Big T and Corey, leading to a bit of a tiff here between Adam and Corey that was just kind of coming out of nowhere and was clearly edited down, where, again, this was just weirdly portrayed, where it felt like a fight that they didn't really want to show in the show, but felt like they had to because it kind of leads into the decision in the following episode. But anyway, we see Leroy and Devin campaign to Frank, throwing Nicole and Melissa, only for, obviously, Frank to end up voting in Leroy and Devin instead, which is obviously this pretty big matchup now. Again, the two strongest teams against each other. A spot where, obviously, they were not favored here by the format, where, obviously, the format just puts this massive bullseye on their backs for having these stars. But, again, it was a nice, again, kind of rebellion to see here. Again, seeing these, again, quote-unquote weaker teams be willing to throw in these biggest threats in the game, which is something that you don't really see too often on the challenge, which obviously has so much precedent of these stronger teams usually being filled with people that have the most relationships. The challenge has them having to barrel roll barrels across the arena and then solve a math puzzle using them. Kind of boring challenge, though. Who would have guessed it? Adam and Steve win once again their fourth elimination in a row here. Pretty insane record. All this obviously being a big blow here for Devin and Leroy, who clearly thought they were winning this season, and again, clearly felt like it was kind of set up for them to go on to win this season. Leroy being frustrated that he fumbled, having Devin as his partner. We end the episode with this setup to TJ revealing what happens to Devin and Leroy's stars, which ends up leading to him saying that, I'll see you at the next challenge. So that was kind of lame, which again clearly makes it clear that it's not following the same format as last time, which, again, why not just follow that same format? I get like the notion of they don't want people to get these stars that didn't earn them, but I'm personally fine with that. I think having these social strategy aspects play into who gets to the final, something that I'm not opposed to, though obviously I guess that's like one of the major reasons why they put the stars in to begin with, is because they obviously don't want people to skate on by just through social strategy means. But anyway, we end up losing Devin and Leroy. And again, Devin and Leroy were pretty big names to lose this early. Again, people that I think clearly the producers would have loved if they went on to win. Again, Leroy getting his first win, Devin just being someone that they clearly liked, where again, them being out this early, very shocking. Though again, not really concerning the format. Again, the format's just one that, again, clearly just makes them massive targets once they get stars. And just in general, they are clearly one of the strongest teams on the board. Again, a male team. Two pretty solid competitors. Again, both very flawed in their own ways. But again, amongst a field of, again, challenge all-stars, they were two of the most experienced players on the board here. So again, them having these massive bullseyes on their backs wasn't shocking. But again, it did feel like they had a lot of connections on this season. It felt like they had the physical prowess to go on the win, where, so again, I think them failing here ends up being a bit surprising, but also a really big moment for the season that really ends up kickstarting the season's higher level of gameplay. With that, we cut to episode 6, where again we focus around the Veronica-Frank relationship, with them clearly just working in lockstep at this point, again being the leaders of these two weaker teams that are trying to take out the stronger teams, clearly having their eyes set out for Amber and Fessy, Nany and Turbo, Ashley and Dario, should be Adam and Steve, but don't because of Veronica's relationship with them. But this is a point where Adam and Steve's target seems to wane a bit. We also start to see this big division in the house. Again, essentially this causing a split house dynamic, and the fact that we obviously see, again, this Veronica side of the house. These, again, assumed weaker players, and then Adam and Steve. Oh, we see, again, the stronger teams together. These more established challenge vets, which seems to be headed by Nany. Or, again, we end up getting focus around Devon and Shane, who have been kind of quiet in it up to this point, but where they end up being kind of part of both sides, where Devon is closer to the Nany side, Shane is close to the Veronica side. To which, while this causes friction between the two of which side to go with, they actually place their benefit where they really end up being protected by both sides throughout this season. But beyond that, we also get some focus around the Dario-Ashley relationship, with him still not wanting to talk to her about why they broke up, and says that he still feels guilt, which, despite the fact that we get this like big thing about like Dario clearly has matured, it's like, doesn't that show a level of immaturity there? The fact that they've been in this house for weeks now and he's still not willing to talk about this massive like friction between the two. But either way, we get to the daily where we get the reveal that the star is up for grabs. The top placing non-star holder ends up getting the star, which I think is so lame. Now, again, as I mentioned before, I get it in the sense that they want people to have stars to earn their stars. Yeah, this is also just lame in the fact that you don't even have to win the challenge to get the star. It's literally, again, just the top non-star holder, which feels arbitrary in the fact that, again, you have to earn your star, where it's like you can get to the final and like technically come in like what, 4th place in a daily that made you earn your star. And also, I think this is just bad for the format as a whole, where obviously at this point, this gives the players that don't have stars no incentive to not be throwing in the star holders, which, to be fair, again, the star holders are these massive overdogs, to where it does actually lead to better TV, the fact that these underdogs do this uprise against these underdogs. But it's still a spot where, again, these star holders are now essentially screwed, because now they're just going to be voted in over and over and over again, as there's no real downside for the people that don't have stars to be throwing them in. Because, again, that would guarantee a star holder goes home, which means that they just get another opportunity to get a star at the following daily. Also, it ends up kind of ruining the point of like you throwing yourself into elimination, where, again, now you're just going to throw in 2 star holders instead and just hope that you win the following daily instead of actually risking your position in the game. Where, again, it kind of adds to a new type of stagnant gameplay forming, to where before it was stagnant because we were getting Adam and Steve voted in over and over again. Now it's stagnant in the fact that we just get other star holders being thrown in constantly. But again, it doesn't end up ruining the season because of how interesting it was to see these, again, underdogs rise up against this like established power structure, which, again, felt very Big Brother coded. Anyway, we get to the daily, which ends up being a timed event in 3 heats, where they have the slide down a slide to reveal symbols that correlate to letters and solve a word puzzle. Kind of a boring challenge, though really funny to see the players just game the challenge right away by trying to uncover as much as they can without sliding down the slide, which, again, clearly was kind of against what the producers were intending here. But surprisingly, Sam and Frank end up winning the star here, putting them in prime position to make it to the end, considering how of the star holders, there were obviously just bigger threats to be targeting than them. While Adam and Steve end up winning the challenge overall, meaning that they finally don't go into elimination. So good for them. But this is where we finally get Nany being back on the show, being worried about her and Turbo getting voted in, especially against Amber and Fessy, again, the 2 strongest teams on the opposing side from Steve and Adam. With us seeing her attempt to flip the vote here onto Katie and Veronica, telling Big T and Devon about this plan, where Devon says that she can't share info with Shane, as it'd get back to Veronica and now become messy, and what do you know? Frank ends up telling Veronica instead about this, which, where did that come from? It's never explained where Frank got this info from, but this leads to this really fun content here. Again, Veronica and Katie, and playing the game very politically here. Again, talking about how she needs to create chaos to get her name out people's mouths, where we see her really just talking to everybody, with Corey even noticing that she's doing this and thinking that something's up. But we see Veronica ending up telling Amber that Melissa is throwing her name out, which Amber actually seemingly believes this, and does end up getting the Nany group to flip their votes against Melissa and Nicole instead of Veronica and Katie, which, too, was probably helped by the fact that Nicole was throwing out Nany's name the previous round as well. But this then leads to Katie going to Melissa and telling her that they're targeting her, with, again, getting another Challenge Masterclass 101 segment, which, again, really fun segment for the show, really fun gameplay, though also kind of sloppy. Especially telling Melissa about all this, as, again, that was kind of irrelevant that you didn't need to do that. All you really need to do is just get the other side to vote for Melissa and Nicole. Like, telling Melissa about this doesn't really benefit you at all in pertaining to the vote itself. But ultimately, again, this obviously keeps the targets off their backs. As again, at this point, you weren't getting voted in. Mind you, it does lead to Melissa leading the charge against another target, where out of the blue, we see Ashley and Dario being targeted because Dario isn't trustworthy because of what he did to Leroy, which is funny that it shows that just completely backfiring on him right away. We do get to the house vote where we actually do see Amber calling out Melissa for throwing her under the bus, and we do now get open talk about how there's someone planting seeds so they don't end up getting exposed, though we do end up getting a lot of talk about this elusive they that's controlling the votes. With, again, this being such a funny segment to me, with TJ, again, clearly showing why he can't host Survivor, and him just, like, constantly saying, who is they? Where it felt like him trying to be, like, a Jeff Probst figure, trying to goad people into exposing their games. Yeah, it just really went nowhere. But the segment does end with everyone ends up voting for Ashley and Dario, with them actually being blindsided in the spot, with Melissa ended up coming out of this, talking about how she thinks she's they, which, But again, we get to the elimination where, once again, no setup to what Adam and Steve are going to do in this spot, where Steve does talk about here about they could be taking out their biggest threats in Fessy and Amber, and Nany and Turbo. And what do? They vote in Corey and Big T, where once again we get the reveal they had made deals with the top teams to keep them safe, and obviously have a bad relationship with Corey, where we saw this fight between Adam and Corey in the previous episodes. So I get this move. I do think, again, for them in particular, they don't really want to continue this trend of star holders going in, as again, that just makes it more likely that they're going to be voted in as a fellow star holder. Also, again, just creates this big enemy of somebody that is likely to win the challenge. And also, it's making a big enemy of a pretty big threat in the game that'll probably come after you, to where, again, I do think for Adam and Steve, I think this move actually does make a lot of sense. But anyway, the challenge itself ends up being, again, another lame one, just being a stacking comp of them having to stack 7 stars on top of a moving platform, and it's just overall pretty lame. But again, Ashley and Dario end up pulling out the win, where Big T and Corey actually were pretty close to finishing, to ultimately don't. And we do get this weird moment of, like, back at the house as they proceed to leave, Corey revealing to Amber that it was Veronica and Katie that were making the move. But I did feel like it was weird they were allowed to talk game as they left, where obviously, again, is there really that big of a difference between him doing this and him, like, kind of saying it on his way out of the arena? Not really, but it did feel like this is a spot where, like, he's technically out of the game. So him, like, intruding on the game here was a little strange. But the episode does end on, again, a segment around Dario and Ashley, with them finally talking about their relationship and how it ended because she wanted a family and Dario didn't, so he just left and never talked about it, which is insane. But again, they get closure, so good for them. But again, we end up losing Big T and Corey here, who were kind of afterthoughts on this season. Again, I talked about earlier, again, very questionable choices for this season, but also they didn't really bring much to the show on this season, where, and Corey had that one fight with Adam. Really outside that, again, they're pretty under-edited for most of it. Well, again, I do like Big T and I do like Corey, and if they were on a mainline season, I'd be perfectly fine with that. I do think the fact they were brought in for All-Stars, it was just such a questionable choice, to where, considering how under-edited they ended up being by the end, I just felt like it was a spot where it was like, the point. But over episode 7, which ends up being one of the better episodes of the season here, one that, again, perfectly fell in line with something we'd see on Big Brother, though we do start off with Ashley and Dario being confused over the previous vote, still talking about who is they, and we get a montage of everyone just having a different answer, with Amber, who again was told the previous episode that's Katie Veronica, decides to go to Melissa and tell her that it's Frank and Veronica, where obviously Frank is a very active strategic player at this point, but I don't get how you would think that Frank is leading the charge on these votes, considering Ashley and Dario just got voted in. Ashley literally being his number 1 in the game. Again, that's kind of an insane thing to take away from this, but either way, also we do get personal content from Fessy, talking about how he's grown up and he has a girlfriend now, and really all this Amber B Fessy content definitely felt foreboding. Here we also get some focus around Nany, who ends up reeling Melissa back into her alliance, along with her also getting a segment about her relationship with Da'Vonne, obviously still continuing to play the middle here. Oh, we get a segment focused around Shane and his relationship with Veronica, where they've been friends for 23 years, which is kind of insane to think about. But now Shane is upset that Frank and Sam have shaken up the rankings. Thinks that him and Da'Vonne are now on the outs, which I don't know why he really thinks this, considering Veronica never really shows any sign at potentially wanting to target Shane. But we do see them arguing over their targets, with Shane wanting Fessy and Amber out, while Veronica wants Nany and Turbo out. But again, clearly from the very beginning here, those are 2 teams that are going to be in danger, with this clearly representing the thoughts of the majority of the house. But we do get some weird content from Shane here about how he wants her to make a big move, but not him, only to later talk about wanting to win the daily so that he can make a move on Frank, which was, again, kind of contradictory. But anyway, we get to the daily, which ends up having both players having to memorize different boards with clocks and locations on them, and you and your partner are on opposite sides of the field, and you have to detonate your key to move on, which ends up detonating your partner's key, and they end up obviously meeting in the middle where they do a puzzle. Again, a kind of convoluted way of just doing a normal memorization task, but the person that ends up answering the most questions right in the fastest amount of time obviously ends up winning here. A pretty boring challenge on the offset, though we do get some interesting content from it. comment along the way. First, in the fact that we have Steve making a Flavor Flav reference, which was so random, simply based around the concept that they're looking at clocks. But really the main entry here comes from Dario and him rushing through the challenge and decides to just mess with the other teams by clocking in early to spook everyone else into clocking in, which again ends up seemingly be effective, where everyone seems to clock in immediately afterwards outside of Katie and Veronica and Shane and Davon. But realistically, this is a terrible tactic. It's like, you really think you're going to win with this? Now, again, maybe he wasn't planning on winning, but that would also be dumb in his spot, where it just very much felt like something that like Dr. Will would do on Big Brother, of like play it up on the show as if he made this like mastermind move when it's actually something that really didn't matter. But either way, Katie and Veronica end up actually winning here. Again, a kind of surprising daily winner, though, to be fair. Again, this was one that was almost entirely just a puzzle, so I guess in that spot you would expect Katie and Veronica to win this. But really the main intrigue in this episode really stems from the house vote, where we end up seeing the split house dynamic play out in a really interesting way here, where we do end up seeing Shane really campaigning to get Frank and Sam in, seemingly getting Nicole and Melissa on board, of Nicole and Melissa at this point being the swing votes. Oh, well, Veronica ends up noticing the fact that no one is talking to her, despite the fact that they're obviously ones with power, where they're seeming to pick up on the fact that the house vote might be going Frank and Sam's way, which does cause some friction between her and Shane, with Shane obviously just actively trying to ruin her plans at this point, to which we do end up seeing Veronica again effectively be able to steer the vote in her direction, mind you, through some questionable tactics here, particularly in her just outright threatening Nicole and Melissa, saying that if you don't go with us, we'll throw you in, which again, not the greatest tactic there, but it does end up working. While we do end up seeing Frank wanting to confront Shane over all this, saying that an insecure boy is coming for him, leading into the house vote, where we do get some arguments here between Nicole and Melissa, with them having differing opinions on this, with Nicole wanting to go with the house and voting for Amber and Vessi, which is it really the house when, like, technically you're the swing vote? Now, I get the fact that, again, Katie and Veronica can't vote, so technically the other side does have the numbers in most given situations, and obviously the other side is going to have a say in one of the nominees, but still, obviously Melissa ends up wanting to go with the Nany side. Oh, we see Amber be very sure that Melissa is still with her, only to actually be unsure about Ashley and Dario, which I don't know why she's unsure. This should be pretty clear she's against her in a spot where, again, why would Ashley and Dario vote for Frank? Where, again, Ashley and Frank are each other's number ones. Again, that's kind of insane. Realistically, again, they were always going to have troubles here getting Frank and Sam in due to the Ashley connection, where really I think the Nany side of things here was just kind of going to lose this battle no matter what. Again, they really didn't have that many great options. Again, Steve and Adam also had the connection with Melissa and Nicole that would have saved them there. And again, either way, it felt like this side was set up to fail. But that takes us to the house vote, where we do end up seeing Amber calling out that she found out who the they is, and that it's Frank, which again makes no real sense. But TJ here ends up asking, are you they? Only for this to start a massive chain of fights here with Frank saying that Amber's making this up, only for Davon to speak out and say that Frank was rallying votes against them, and saying that Frank threatened them. But again, we really did not see any of this on the show. There does make me question like how much this was just them trying to demonize Frank here to try to get the votes on him. But anyway, we end up getting this like big argument here between Frank and Davon, only for us to cut the turbo, being bored and yawning in the background. But either way, Melissa and Nicole end up being the swings as expected, with them ultimately ending up voting in Amber and Fessy, with again Nicole getting her way, setting us up for a pretty strong matchup at the jungle. Though we do end up getting another fight following this between Shane and Frank, where really Frank ends up getting a lot of flack here for how aggressive of a game he's playing. I really feel like them trying to paint like every little thing that happened in the game on Frank here, which seemed kind of ridiculous. But anyway, we get to the elimination, where unsurprisingly at that point, Katie and Veronica end up voting in Nany and Turbo, without obviously just being the correct strategic move for them to make, making out one of these two big threats in the game at this point. Now, considering these two really strong teams facing off against each other here, ends up being a pretty lame elimination, it being one where they have to scratch off a board to see an image underneath that they have to then solve a puzzle recreating it, which makes you question, why do the scratch off portion when it's just a puzzle anyway? And I guess it helps to know what the puzzle is of, but also again, it's just a puzzle. By the way, Nany and Turbo winning this in what ends up being a pretty quick challenge, where this was very weirdly edited to where it really felt like they kind of rushed through all of it. But anyway, we have Amber and Fessy leaving, with them talking about how their relationship has blossomed and they feel like family now, which is something we definitely won't hear over and over again on this season. But the episode doesn't end just there, where we do end up getting to the following morning, where Veronica and Shane end up talking it out, with it feeling like their friendship's on the rocks here. All over Frank, with Frank gloating in confessional now about being in Veronica's ear and how he is the reason why everyone went home. And we get a flashback to him targeting each of the booths where he ends up declaring himself as they. Even though, again, it makes no sense for him to actually be the they. Either way, we do end up losing Amber and Fessy. And I feel like this is such a disappointing season for Amber and Fessy. I mean, I think they come into this season seeming like the clear frontrunners. Again, two of the better competitors in recent challenge. Again, Fessy being someone that obviously hasn't had a win yet, but has been shown to be pretty capable most seasons, got to the end of almost every season he's on. And this season, he has Amber B, someone that, again, decimated the Double Agents final, and someone just in general, again, very good partner in this spot. And the fact that they kind of blow it and get taken out mid-game here is kind of surprising. Where again, they were my winner picks coming into this season. I just felt like they were so primed for a win here, and for them to just be taken out kind of unceremoniously midway through the game was pretty surprising to see, but that's obviously because of how big of threats they seem to be. We're really a sense of being like the minor break in this endgame of them not targeting people with stars, simply because, again, Amber B and Fessy seem to be a threat worth taking out over guaranteeing a star. And outside that, again, really, they didn't really provide much on the show. Again, I have nothing bad to really say about them here, but they also just, again, did not really provide too much entertainment on this season. But then we move on to episode 8, another pretty strong episode here. When they start off with, again, this majority group of the Veronica side of the house deciding on their target, deciding to target Ashley and Dario. Obviously not a great target for Frank at this point. Ashley being his number one. Well, it's getting some Dodo content from Adam and him and Frank saying it's insanity for Adam to think that he can vote out his number one over him when he's already voted him in. Which does all lead to Frank warning Ashley about this, with obviously the plan at this point being to send in Ashley and Dario against Nany and Turbo. 69. Again, the 2-star holders that aren't in this big alliance. Dario finally admitting that was the wrong move to get rid of Leroy, his number one, which is such a ridiculous thing to say, as that should be very obvious to begin with. But also, again, strange in the fact that we see them warning Ashley and Dario, yet despite that, Ashley and Dario don't do anything about it, where, to be fair, I don't know how much they could have done to really help themselves, especially considering the other options would be to throw Frank and Sam under a bus, which they weren't going to do. But again, would have been nice to see them at least attempt to do something. But this all takes us to the drama of the episode, that revolving around Turbo. Don't play with a girl's heart. Where Turbo had been sleeping in the living room, trying to be away from other people as they annoy him, only for this to actually end up annoying the other players, with Adam being upset that he's hogging up what's supposed to be a shared place. Where I really feel like Turbo just kind of spent a lot of this season just on his own, not really wanting to hang out with others. And we do see him like literally trying to sleep while the others are partying. But again, this ends up causing further conflict when Turbo ends up being upset at people for leaving stuff in the living room, acting as if it's his room, leading to a bit of a fight here between him and Adam. Which, again, not a great spot to be in when Adam is someone that could definitely win power. Though, too fair, you can say he's back. But anyway, Nany ends up trying to split up this fight. Oh, yeah, having Turbo calling him Adam with piece of shit as his last name, which is, again, a typical Turbo thing. But anyway, Nany ends up trying to break up this fight here, leading to the moment that we had seen in the previews. And I just assumed, actually, at this point that this scene was cut from the show, yet we somehow get it again all the way in episode 8. But it's a scene of Nany telling Turbo that's enough, telling him to stop, despite the fact that Turbo just continuously keeps going on and on, with the fight then ending up spreading to Melissa as well, who calls him a disrespectful little prick. We do see her be very petty following this and leaving her plate on Turbo's pillow, which, and I feel like I wouldn't want to be provoking Turbo. But we do get a funny moment like later in the episode at the party where Melissa ends up trying to talk to him while he's trying to sleep, with him saying that we don't need to, only for Melissa to end up talking to him anyway. But again, at least just another fight between the two. Nany again trying to split them up, with it clearly not going anywhere, and her saying that she doesn't understand why people are confronting Turbo with things, which again, I don't either, as again, I just wouldn't want to do that. Anyway, this ends up leading into the daily, with TJ saying it's one of the sickest challenges, aka solve a pipe puzzle and then ride a quad off a cliff and grab a star. It's pretty lame. Or really, there's no physicality here at all. You're literally just standing in place doing the puzzle, and then just the ATV's right next to you. Again, this is just so boring, but we do get a little funny moment from Katie talking about overcoming her fears of doing a heights challenge, only for her to then end up missing the star anyway and still get a pretty big dodo at it despite all this. But at the end, they end up saying it was separated by seconds, which is like no shit, because this challenge barely takes any time to begin with. But Adam and Steve end up winning again, and with that, it becomes kind of clear that Nany and Turbo going in to their previous fight. But we do end up seeing Veronica here trying to get Shane on board with voting in Nany and Turbo. Monday. For him to shut that down, with again him still trying to play the middle here. Instead, once again, trying to put the target onto Frank and Sam, specifically by recalling them having previously targeted Steve and Adam, only for Frank to overhear this conversation, leading to more bickering between the two, with Frank saying, "You can't get my name out of your tongue." But anyway, at nominations, the vote ends up shifting instead onto Ashley and Dario, with everyone voting for them as they have no allies because they burned everyone by this point. And even Turbo, of all people, talking about how like he needs revenge for Leroy, which again kind of came out of left field. At the vote, we do end up getting more fighting here between Frank and Shane, with Shane calling him out for also having a star, meaning that he's also a viable option to go in, with Frank saying, "Is that a threat?" And Shane here ends up ridiculously claiming that he's been the one saving Frank, which is like, how? But it does lead to Yvonne shutting Shane up in this spot. And we do see Frank and Sam ending up voting for themselves, as again, clearly they weren't going to vote in Ashley and Dario. But I do love how like Sam reacts to this, saying that I hope he knows what he's doing. It's like, well, you're the last person to vote. This vote doesn't matter. But again, we do get a lot of focus here around what are Steve and Adam going to do, where obviously Nany and Turbo are the bigger threats. So they do talk about Frank being the head of the snake. And like any head of the snake, you proceed to make a deal with them, as we do see Adam making a deal with Frank here, with Frank scolding him for not being a strategic thinker, which again, that becomes very clear by the end of the season, with Adam saying he hopes he doesn't regret it, which I mean, too far doesn't fall back on him, but it's also dumb to rely on this. Now, straight up, again, I don't hate the move, as I do think the correct call is still actually to target Nany and Turbo. Again, they are the bigger threats and challenges, and Adam and Steve aren't really in dire need of a big shield at this point, especially because again, they could pretty much beat most people in elimination at this point. So again, I think trying to take out Nany and Turbo was probably the correct call either way. But again, we get Shane campaigning against Frank once again, this time to Adam. Shane proceeds to mock him, with Frank saying, "Are you mocking me?" And Shane saying that you're mockable, which again felt like a very classic MTV sort of fight there. Obviously, we get to the elimination where Adam and Steve do end up voting in Nany and Turbo. And what ends up being another puzzle-based elimination, now where one player is holding up the board while the other one solves the puzzle on top. But they only have 3 minutes before their partner has to switch out, which was really dumb. Considering the fact that you have to also collect the puzzles during the first go around, there really was almost no point in actually trying to do the puzzle the first time, as by the time you got back with all the puzzle pieces, you didn't have much time to do the puzzle, and by that point it would be reset anyway. Now, mind you, when they reset it, it just drops to the ground and it's still mostly in place, which also makes you question, like, why reset at all then? But either way, Nany and Turbo win once again, which really was largely Turbo's, as he pretty much did almost all the work for this elimination, solving the puzzle and getting the pieces. But either way, we lose Ashley and Dario. We're just kind of quiet exit for them. I mean, as I said before, they really did not do much in this episode, and it's a spot where I feel like their previous elimination appearance was the episode that they got a lot more focus in. So with that said, Dario is someone that I was surprised at how good he was on this season. I think the lasting impact of Dario is that he was kind of a dud for most of his OG run. While I did think he was very fun in Battle of the Bloodlines and had an okay appearance in Rivals 3, he was again just such a non-factor on Dirty 30, to where I feel like Dario was someone that most people just kind of forgotten about coming into this season, but I felt like he was again a fun presence on this season. Again, his move to take out Leroy is so stupid, but actually made for incredible TV, obviously. And in general, I feel like Dario is someone that I would not be opposed to being back in the standard casting pool for the challenge. Now, Ashley K, again, straight up did not bring too much, but was someone that, again, it was cool to see back just for, again, another like fresh face that we haven't seen in a little bit, but realistically, again, not someone I'm hoping to see back, while Dario is someone that I thought brought a lot more to the show. But then we move on to episode 9, where we get a weird, like, scripted bickering between Nany and Turbo, leading to the previously on, which was so strange. But also following that, we get Nany calling Casey again, because that's kind of funny. But also we get focus around the Nicole-Melissa relationship, where we essentially get a weekly check-in on them from this point forward, with them very clearly flirtily playing around, and Veronica ends up calling them out for crossing boundaries, considering Nicole has a relationship at home, where I wonder where that's going. Oh, well, we finally see this trust here between Da'Vonne and Veronica, with Shane trying to bring them together, or at least pretend like they like each other, which ultimately doesn't end up happening here. Da'Vonne just scoffing at this idea, which was clearly just setting up the red herring for later in the episode. Oh, we hear about Katie building a house and wanting the money to go into the house, which felt like a very privileged response to what you're going to do with the money. And which, again, I wonder why that was here. But anyway, we get to the daily. It being another star challenge now. It being, again, another like carnival game sort of challenge of them having to push their partner down a board that has point values along the way. And the closer you to the center, the more points you get. Kind of typical fare here. Oh, well, the farthest out ends up being eliminated with the last standing wins, which makes you question what is the point of the points if you just get eliminated for being the furthest away, which I assume is because they want to add this like 10-point deduction for touching the board. But it did make all this feel kind of arbitrary. Like, I don't get why you're just not DQing people for touching the board and just make it just the furthest in general, but either way. Also, the last standing of the non-star teams end up getting a star here, and this ends up being a kind of funny challenge in the sense that we do see Shane and Da'Vonne really bickering for every round, but how to push, only for them to end up winning both the star and the challenge as a whole. Being a bit of a shakeup here, as again, recently we've been getting a lot of daily wins on the Veronica side of things. This is obviously a win kind of for the other side, and a spot where Nany and Turbo end up being happy as they know they're safe here. And interestingly, we do follow this up with some strategizing at the daily where, again, I feel like this is something we like really never see is people actually talking game during the break time before they reset to have TJ close out the challenge. But here we do end up seeing Nicole instantly say that she wants to be the house vote, as this could be the last elimination, the last chance to get a star, which I don't get why they think that when there are 4 stars, meaning you would think they would go down the final 4. Mind you, it seemed like a house consensus concept here was that they were going to just go down to 5 and just auto-eliminate the team that didn't have a star, which, to be fair, is probably the correct way of handling all this to make the stars matter even more. But again, we've literally seen this multiple times now in the challenge where they don't do this. Literally last season being an example of that. Actually, last season instead being one where they actually gave a last chance to the people that didn't have a star. Or again, I feel like I definitely would not be thinking that's how they would handle all this. But again, it seemed like that's what the consensus was, or because again, Nicole and Melissa want to go in alongside Katie and Veronica also wanting to go in here, making it kind of clear on the offset that these should be the ultimate nominations. And to be fair, I don't think it ever really changed off this, though we do obviously get a lot of focus on the red herring here of Veronica being worried that Da'Vonne is going to take away her opportunity to get a star, which doesn't even make sense why she'd want to do that, as why would she not want Katie and Veronica at the end? These 2 people that would probably be the easiest to beat in a final, but again, that ends up being the main intrigue for the rest of the episode. For a while, again, it was kind of obvious that none of this really mattered. I did feel like the events leading up to, again, were more fun than what you would expect them to be. Now, we do end up getting a party sequence that ends up leading to Veronica rolling her ankle on her way there, slipping off the stairs, which literally happened in All Stars 3, to where, like, how is she doing this again? And again, it leads to some fun content here, actually, from Frank and Sam both wanting to attend to her, with Frank literally having a physical therapy degree, yet despite that, Shane is the one to hog up the spotlight here, in a spot where Frank just gets frustrated and leaves. Again, this further adds this red herring that Shane wants to throw Frank into elimination, even though by doing that he'd be screwing over Veronica, as we do end up seeing Frank be worried that he would go in. Or we do see him put together the optimal plan, that 2 was probably going to happen anyway, but again, the plan of voting in Melissa and Nicole as the house vote, as in doing so, that essentially forces Shane's hand into voting in Katie and Veronica, as not putting Katie and Veronica into elimination would essentially be screwing them over in this spot, where in that world, again, Shane would not be able to really do anything else, as again, that would be a direct betrayal of his friend for 23 years. So again, we do see Frank relaying this plan to Adam, with him agreeing, only for Da'Vonne to interrupt here, trying to pull Adam away, which does lead to more bickering here between Shane and Da'Vonne, with obviously Da'Vonne not being fully on board with this plan, and as she wants to protect Turbo Nany's star, where obviously a big issue of all this is the fact that no matter who wins of Melissa and Nicole, or Veronica and Katie, are going to have to take a star from one of the remaining players, and both of them are most likely to take Nany and Turbo. team that they had the least amount of connections to outside the non-vulnerable teams, while also a team that is clearly a massive threat in the game, to where because of that, we do see Devon, again, attempting to turn Shane here against Frank, though realistically, nothing ever seemed to change here from Shane, where I do feel like Shane is likely to never do anything here, and to fair, Devon is someone that I don't think she actually would have followed through this anyway, as it simply isn't really worth burning social capital for. But anyway, we get to the house vote, where again, it goes as expected. Melissa and Nicole end up volunteering and going in, although we do see Nany getting increasingly frustrated over the course of the ending of this episode, where they're saying that the writing's on the wall and people are going to steal her star, calls them idiots, saying that they should be going for Adam and Steve, which, again, fair. Problem is that's kind of difficult to get Adam and Steve out at this point. Again, we see Katie and Veronica and Nicole and Melissa both being willing to go to the end of Adam and Steve at this point. And again, if you can't get them in the house vote at this point, which again would not be possible considering the votes available, that means that you'll be sending them in against whichever team got voted in here, which is a team that they're likely going to beat. For a while, obviously, the optimal play here would have been to get rid of Adam and Steve. It did feel like something that was just kind of impractical for it to ultimately end up happening. Again, seeing Nany be so incredulous towards this endgame stretch here was, again, a really funny version of Nany I feel like we haven't really seen in recent years. Anyway, we get to the elimination where Shane ends up obviously deciding to vote in Katie and Veronica, only for Devon to interject saying, "What if we disagree?" Only to then admit that she's just playing because she was never going to do that. They does end up talking here about how she does genuinely want Veronica out, get her out of the equation, which I do feel like that's probably the incorrect call here, as again, I feel like Katie and Veronica are easier to be in the final, but either way. The challenge itself here ends up being kind of a lame one, another coordination-based one of them having to guide a pin using a rope to pop a balloon, which, again, they do a lot of these coordination-style challenges on this season, which thematically make a lot of sense. Obviously, again, it's rivals, these two people that are meant to not be able to work together, and again, these are things that force you to work together, to where, again, it makes a lot of sense to have these style challenges, but I do feel like we get so many of them here. This one gets really hyped up as, like, one of the best eliminations ever, with it being so close, when it's like, I really don't care. So again, really funny to see Nany and Turbo not rooting for anybody from the sidelines. They obviously know their stars getting stolen, but ultimately Melissa and Nicole end up winning here, and obviously end up stealing Nany and Turbo's star, with Nany being pissed and goes on a rant about how they're not playing to win, with her clearly thinking that she's about to be sent home, because again, it seemed like that's just what they assumed the format was, only for TJ to say, "See you at the next challenge," because obviously. Anyway, we lose Katie and Veronica, and I actually thought this was a genuinely great appearance for Katie and Veronica. Again, in a spot where coming into this season, I thought they were primed to be one of the first few boots. They actually have a pretty extensive run here in a spot where they actually play pretty well from a political standpoint. Again, Veronica essentially ends up running the game for most of the time there, and being able to usurp this power structure that, again, we see be so powerful in Modern Challenge. Again, the likes of, again, Devin and Leroy, the likes of Nany, likes of Amber and Fessy, again, these really big power players from the flagship show, and we see Veronica really toppling that power structure, which was really interesting to see. Oh, well, I feel like Katie is also someone that's been kind of a dud on her recent appearances. Yeah, I feel like this was also a fun appearance from her. For a while, again, she was a bit quieter in the edit still than most of the other players on the board. I still feel like she provided for some fun moments as well, and actually seemed to be into the political game this time, where we see her like help Veronica enact her plans, where in general, again, I thought this was a great appearance from them. Obviously, again, I never had faith in them winning, especially considering they were actively trying to take Adam and Steve to the end, who are obviously always going to beat them. But I feel like from an entertainment standpoint this season, they were really fun, and I feel like they played the game in a way that felt very reminiscent of something like Big Brother, which again was a very interesting dynamic to see on the challenge here. But then we move on to episode 10, which again, despite how obvious the ultimate result of the episode was going to be, it did actually have a really fun path there, where we do start off with Nany talking about how her goal is to win the daily, as she needs to make sure she's in the elimination so that they're not locked out and so that they get a star, which gets propped up throughout this entire episode as the main storyline here, that Nany and Turbo need to get a star, when it's like, based on the format, you're gonna get a star anyway. Like, this is actually kind of ridiculous, like the notion that they need to throw themselves into elimination, when, again, based on the format, no matter how this plays out, you would be getting a star the following round. And again, if you're in elimination and win, you'll be beating a non-star holder, you would get a star in that spot, which is obviously the situation that they were thinking of. But also, if you don't play, that also means that 2-star holders will be playing in elimination against each other, as you're the only non-star holder, meaning that when that star holder gets eliminated, you're automatically the top non-star holder to get the star in the next round. And again, it would be really unprecedented for them just to purge them from the final just because they didn't have a star in that spot, to where, again, I think this is just kind of an insane thing that the show is really trying to prop up, this notion that Nany needs to fight to get into elimination so that they just don't get purged out of the game when it's like, that was never going to happen here. But also, to the same note, we also get a lot of ridiculous content from Melissa being worried about her star getting stolen back from Nany after stealing it previous round, when that's also insane concept considering Nany won't have the opportunity to steal a star. Again, literally the only situations here is that Nany, again, is in elimination and wins, to which she just automatically steals the star of the person she won against, or she doesn't go into elimination to where she's just auto-given the star of the person who gets eliminated. Like, either way, there's no way for Melissa to have her star stolen unless she herself is in an elimination, ends up losing, to which she'll be out of the game, to which all this is just so stupid. Either way, we also get our episode check-in on Melissa and Nicole, where we get very strange content. The fact that they're clearly getting more touchy-feely, and the producer even asked them, do you touch all your friends like that? And we get probably the most awkward scene of it all. The fact that Nicole ends up calling her girlfriend with Melissa there, introduce her to her girlfriend. All this is, again, just so strange to do. But also we do get content rolling around Adam and Steve, with us essentially reintroducing their initial storyline about how Adam's still upset Steve over the star and never got his explanation, and Steve just stammers around instead of giving him an apology, which really just felt like, again, them trying to reintroduce this right before the final. Well, also we get a pretty fun Turbo sequence here of, again, Turbo 69 just being on his own and talking about his love of animals while he's watching fish, saying they can't be with humans because they're snakes while fish are fish, which, what great insight from Turbo there. Anyway, we also get personal content here from Devon with her calling her daughter, with that clearly setting up her motivations for the eventual final. Oh, we get some focus around how rocky the Shane Devon relationship is right now, to where we head into the challenge, which who would have guessed it gets tested there. But anyway, it ends up being a challenge of them having to hold together puzzle pieces like a sandwich. Again, another coordination-based challenge here, where we do surprisingly see Frank and Sam pulling out the win here, ahead of Nany and Turbo. Again, and being portrayed as, oh, might be shut out of getting a star when that makes no sense. But either way, we have Shane being pissed at Devon along the way, to which they end up arguing the entire time, with Adam deciding to stand up for Devon after she gets emotional, despite the fact that he can't even pronounce her name correctly, which ends up leading to this big fight here with Shane and Adam. Adam tried to touch his arm, which I really don't even get what he was trying to do there. But again, really funny to see Adam talking about how you need to treat people with kindness and consideration, despite the fact that he just doesn't know Devon's name. Oh, we have Shane being portrayed very negatively here, talking about how Devon's pretending to be the victim, and he's always been kind and considerate to Devon. But let's then getting a very strange sequence immediately following this of, like, Devon at the later party, where Devon talks about how her partner, even at his age, thinks that being a villain on TV is just a cool thing, only for Shane to be in the background just staring at her. And ends up telling her that if you want to go home, we go home. And he's not going to be winning any money for her, with this also feeling like kind of set up into their dynamics coming into the final. But again, we obviously see Shane just really hamming this up, where he starts packing his bags. They return to the house, only for him and Devon to make up and admit to the fact that he was just packing for good TV. But anyway, we get to the house vote, where Nany says that she needs to be the house vote, and who would have guessed? Everyone just votes her in, because why would they not vote her in? It makes no sense. Oh, we see Nany saying you should throw us in against Adam and Steve, and again, that's also a spot where, like, obviously Adam and Steve are going to be voted in, like, or again, Frank and Sam really have no incentive to be doing anything else, especially right before the final, to where obviously we do get the fake out here of Frank and Sam potentially voting in Shane and Devon because of their rocky relationship. It just never felt like a practicality here. But again, we do continue with this, like, dodo content for Adam and him truly thinking that Frank won't vote him in, only for him to be blindsided when Frank and Sam vote him in. Where obviously, again, Frank and Sam are going to want the two strongest teams against each other before the final. And at least that Adam, again, being on this high horse, saying that I play with kindness and integrity, and ends up calling Frank a clown. But either way, we get to the elimination, which is a very weird one. This being a two-part elimination. The first part being one where you open your box and see what's inside. And if you have a star, you then have to bluff with your opponent over if you had a star or not. Again, you have to do it for 5 rounds. And I feel like we've been seeing this style of challenge on so many reality shows recently. I mean, like Beast Games, $1 Million Secret, countless others. And my big question is, why is this on the challenge? Like, I get that All Stars, again, needs to be a toned-down version of the show. And again, especially considering all these mixed-gendered pairs, you can't really have these super, super physical challenges, as that would just be unfair. But again, a bluffing challenge. And again, it is funny just how unserious the players play this, where again, this was just so surreal to see. Again, like Adam and Steve just acting so over the top, saying that they need to make sure that Nany and Turbo can't read them. Also mentioned there was a pretty questionable moment through all this of like Adam just asking Nany, when did you move to the United States? When it's like, she was born here. And that's such a weird thing to ask her. But again, it ends up going back and forth here with really every bluff ending up getting called out anyway. It's about where for some reason Adam and Steve get one extra turn as the ones calling the bluff here, where again, it makes you question like why they do 5 rounds. Why not just allow for both teams to just have a fair shot at it? It felt very strange they did this, to where, as again, what this ends up amounting for is that round 2 is them having to transfer balls from one side of the arena to the other and using sticks. Again, another coordination challenge. Though the more points you get, the less balls you have to transfer, aka Adam and Steve have an advantage here because they got one extra point in a spot where they got one extra round of calling bluffs, which was dumb. But to be fair, they probably would have won anyway, as they really just demolished this portion of the challenge. They have no difficulty here in a spot where Nany and Turbo just struggle to even pick up the balls, and where really the second portion of this challenge just ended up being kind of boring. But ultimately, again, it just amounts to an easy Adam and Steve win, with them winning their 5th elimination of the season. Literally over half the eliminations on this season, meaning that they also directly sent home over half the cast, which is kind of an insane track record for their run here. And again, with them also winning 2 dailies along the way, along with that initial star challenge, they essentially won a challenge in 8 out of the 10 rounds on this season, which is pretty insane. Oh, well, Nany and Turbo end up leaving, saying that they're now family, because obviously. But obviously we end the episode with the reveal that they've all made the final, which is actually a pretty big moment here for Da'Vonne and Shane in particular. Again, the only two who have never been to a final before. I know Shane has been commonly talked about as like one of the best competitors to have never made a final, to where, again, that changes, kind of. I mean, I don't know if you include All-Stars as part of that statistic, but if you do, again, definitely helps his resume. But anyway, here we end up losing Nany and Turbo. And again, I thought they were perfectly fine on this season. Nany is someone that I think on the mainline show, you see a lot of like people being kind of annoyed about how she's just on over and over again. Yeah, I'm personally not at the point where I'm annoyed of Nany. But really, it's like, one, this is obviously her return. She had been gone from a show since 38, which to be fair wasn't that long ago, but a couple years, so at least that's something. Even beyond that, though, I feel like Nany is still like kind of fun in the show. While she's not as messy as she used to be, she still does provide for some arguments at points. She still does have some spunk to her, to where, again, I still think Nany is a fun presence on the challenge. I'm personally not annoyed at seeing Nany over and over again, unlike someone like Aneesa, who really brings nothing to the show at this point. Well, again, Turbo 69 also brought his typical thing to the show, again, kind of this like fish out of water sort of content. And but really, a season that, again, felt like this was probably Nany's season to win. Again, had a very strong partner. Also, not the strongest field competitors amongst them. And again, Nany still ends up falling short. Where, again, will she ever get her win? Who knows? But I feel like this has got to be a pretty disappointing loss for her, considering, again, how close it felt like she came to winning here. But anyway, we then move on to episode 11, part 1 of the final, because you definitely needed 2 parts for this final. In a spot where we waste like the first like fourth of the episode on just plain filler of everyone eating outside and discussing what they want the money for, and it's just being so boring. Though we do get a little fun moment from this, and the fact that they also talk about who will be friends after this, only for Shane to say he'll be friends with Da'Vonne, only for her to then not answer that, with him obviously being upset at this and proceeds to leave, which again was fun content there. Now, I'll say bad for their games. I don't think this is a good move from Da'Vonne to just be pissing off your partner right before the final. But again, fun for the show. Oh, we obviously get check-ins on the other pairings, where Melissa and Nicole end up doing a puzzle in bed, as Melissa taking off her clothes to do, I guess, and things get blurred out with stars, to where, again, I wonder what happened there. Certainly doesn't help Nicole's case. Oh, we see a flashback for Adam and Steve to Road Rules and how they were fighting there, with them clearly still being on kind of rocky terms, where again, it felt like them trying to set up intrigue for the later dilemma. Oh, well, we actually get some pretty good content here from Sam, which was actually pretty nice to see here. Again, the fact that she talks about her relationship with Frank and how they hadn't talked in 7 years. Yeah, says that she knows that the final is going to be intense, and she doesn't care if he has to drag her dead, which I thought was a nice piece of development there. Again, the fact that obviously the main takeaway from their last final was how upset she was at Frank and Zach for dragging her around. And for now to see this like Frank-Sam relationship to have evolved to the point where she is okay with this is, again, kind of like a cool little note on the progression of their relationship. But either way, we get to the final, which starts with them being ridden in on trucks with a remix of This Is How We Do It playing, which was very weird. But anyway, we get to reveal the prize money, where the winners get $125,000, kind of a random amount of money. All the other prizes end up being kind of pathetic, especially fourth place getting only $5,000, which, I mean, like, at that point, you might as well just give out nothing for last place. But either way, this ends up being another checkpoint-based final, where obviously you get stars based on your placement per checkpoint. So a minor tweak that they end up making here that I did like was the fact that no matter what, if you finish, you at least get 1 star, which ends up creating this like actual incentive for you to finish the challenge, where if you don't finish, you get 0. So again, even if you're last place, you still have to try. Also beyond that, feels like a counter to like the dumb rulings we've seen in the past, where people would like give up on a checkpoint and end up being just randomly DQ'd, like Angela, where I feel like having a ramification that isn't a DQ for not finishing a checkpoint, again, makes more sense to have. So hopefully that's kind of their idea behind this as well. We'll see. Or hopefully that's also their idea behind this. But anyway, checkpoint 1 ends up having them having to memorize symbols at the bottom of a steep hill. They'll then have to climb up that hill while passing a ball back and forth in a spot where, shockingly, Nicole and Melissa finished this right away, which was so weird considering they didn't even finish the last memory challenge that they had as a daily, which this is clearly inspired from. It was like, how'd they win this one? All we end up seeing Sam really struggling getting up the hill in this spot, with obviously Frank being upset. They talk about how this is Sam's biggest fear right away, with, again, this very much feeling so reminiscent to happen on Battle of the Seasons, and the fact that this is, again, another desert location that, again, kind of feels like, did they like handpick this location to be in the final in the case that Sam and Frank made it here just so they can make this comparison? Again, not a great start for Sam here, with her already struggling with just this first checkpoint, which they end up not even finishing the checkpoint by the end, despite that memory challenge being the one that actually got them their start to begin with. All while we see Adam and Steve really underperform in this spot, really underperform throughout the entirety of this episode, and the fact that they end up coming in 3rd, which again was very shocking to see considering they were just so clearly the frontrunners coming into all this. But that takes us to checkpoint 2, which is literally just a redo of the barrel elimination Adam and Steve had previously won, where again, you would once again think that they would obviously win this as they've already done it. Only for Shane and Davon to pull out the win here, and them coming in 2nd, with that also being a massive blow there. Again, Davon and Shane really overperforming in this spot, but we do end up seeing Frank and Sam once again come in last, so at least this time finish. But it ends up being this pretty sad scene following this of Frank just coming to the realization that he's clearly not going to be winning this season, which, to be fair, again, you can kind of expect that. And to be fair, I think Frank did expect that for most of the season. Like, that's why he's been playing the way he has. But I do think, like, for this to now become the reality in this moment, and you just see how emotional he ends up getting here, again, was just kind of sad to see. Anyway, it takes us to checkpoint 3, which ends up being a stacking comp. I can't believe it. Them having to stack 28 baskets into a pyramid using a bungee sling, which was kind of weird, and just another coordination-based challenge, though. Also, an interesting aspect to this is that every team ends up getting 1 ball that they're able to use to sabotage another team, which leads to some intrigue. Now, we do see Melissa and Nicole not take advantage of that because they're too busy arguing between themselves the entire time, with Nicole ending up accidentally knocking over some baskets midway through, and Melissa just constantly freaking out here, which ends up leaving them in last, all while Shane and Davon end up seemingly doing the best of the stacking portion here, almost winning here, only for Adam to decide to sabotaging Frank for some reason, which again feels like such an idiotic move here. Again, Adam just doing this simply because he's petty and wants revenge over Frank throwing him to elimination, despite the fact that, again, you're literally about to lose to Shane and Davon, where ultimately Adam ends up missing his shot, only for Frank to actually make the smart move and decide to, instead of retaliate against Adam, go for Davon and Shane, and ends up knocking their stack over, where Shane then ends up retaliating towards Frank, which again, also why, when Adam and Steve are about to finish, or all this was so stupid. But ultimately, Adam and Steve do end up winning this checkpoint, despite their idiocy. All Frank and Sam come in 2nd, which ends up being a little minor rebound for them. But the final checkpoint of the episode here ends up having to recreate a camping setup with 42 items, to where they have to go back and forth to get the items and to see the display. And initially I thought this was kind of lame. Again, kind of like, again, typical all-star shtick of them, again, watering down aspects of the flagship show. Yeah, this actually did seem to be pretty difficult, considering they can only get 1 item at a time, meaning that each member had to at least go back and forth 21 times, and also considering like how difficult it was to actually memorize where everything was going. And this did seem like a pretty brutal task, and we do end up seeing And we do end up getting this like weird moment throughout all of it of like TJ just sitting down and playing his guitar and singing while people are doing the challenge, which was weird. But Adam and Steve end up being the first to finish the physical portion of all this, only to get one item wrong. The fact that they didn't fold their napkin the right way, which is kind of dumb, but Adam ends up being the one to point out that this is wrong, only for Steve to be confidently wrong here and telling him that he's wrong, leading to Shane and Devon pulling out the win in this checkpoint, ending the episode in the lead in the final as a whole. Oh, we see Sam and Frank come in second, a spot where, again, not a great performance from them considering they were so confident they were going to win this coming into it, where, again, the fact that they still could not win a single checkpoint at this point was definitely not a great spot for them. Oh, we see Melissa and Nicole coming out in third after more Melissa freakouts, with Adam and Steve finishing in last. TJ even mocking them along the way and proceeding to tell Adam at the end that you were right about the napkins, which did feel like him throwing Steve under a bus a bit. Again, we ultimately end this episode with them being 3 points behind Devon and Shane, which was probably a perfect point to end the episode here to make it seem suspenseful that Adam and Steve might actually not win by the end. And now moving on to the finale, where we obviously started off with checkpoint 5, the gross food eating one that is literally just them redoing the previous gross food challenge, though this time with pho instead of a milkshake, which feels kind of random. And we actually get actual disgusting things to put in, where again they have to essentially play the newlywed game, and if they get one wrong, they have to put something into their pho, though they did add something to this in the fact that if you get a question right, then you get to add something to another team's pho, which, again, cool addition. Does lead to some fun drama here, and also some dodo content from Shane with him thinking that Melissa and Nicole are in second place when they're really in third and ends up sabotaging them. Oh, you see Adam and Steve get one right only to then just put it in their own to not piss anyone off, which sure, I guess. But again, same issues as the milkshake challenge, the fact that it's just kind of lame as well. Again, at least there was disgusting things to put in, like chili, I guess. But again, obviously we get worms and we get snails. Again, it is actually genuinely worse, but it's still a spot where, again, it's just them drinking it up at the end. Though again, considering how much harder it was, we did see teams struggling a bit more here, but still, Adam and Steve pull out the win of this checkpoint, narrowing the lead between them and Devon and Shane. While Frank and Sam come in second. Another point where Frank and Sam end up essentially losing the redo of a challenge they had won earlier, but it's still good enough for them to now be tied for last with Nicole, so that's something. But then we get to the overnight portion, aka just them sleeping on a blanket. So good for them for that, I guess. Well, here we get talk about Adam wanting to propose to Avery, which I wonder if that'll lead to something. But it takes us to the checkpoint 6 the following morning, which has them having to paddle along a river for a mile, which was kind of lame. And I felt like the editors even realized this, to where we get some very strange editing tricks during this, from just these random shots of just TJ standing and it being interlaced with the other teams just rowing in the background. Oh, we obviously have this, again, montage with music playing over it where the word tiger comes up, and then they decide to like anamorph TJ into a tiger for some reason. Like, what was any of this? But it does actually come down to a pretty close race at the end between Sam and Frank and Adam and Steve, with Adam and Steve unsurprisingly doing the actual best at the rowing portion, though the problem is that they're rowing in the wrong direction, like seemingly like rowing sideways, which allows Frank and Sam to take the lead and surprisingly pull out the win. Where again, I think coming into this, you would expect that they would win again something like the gross food challenge or the memory challenge, but for them to win and just all out physical based challenge again was impressive to see here. But with Devon and Shane coming in last in this checkpoint, it does lead to Adam and Steve finally taking back the lead. All Frank and Sam are now officially in third, which I wonder if any of these placements will end up changing. Taking us to checkpoint 7, the last like true physical checkpoint here, one that was probably the most physical of the bunch. The fact that he had to go back and forth with this bar that has bowls on it and use them to transfer water to fill up a tube, which again had them going back and forth quite a bit. And through that, we end up seeing Sam in particular really struggling here, where they're seemingly having injured her knee, even though Frank doesn't back that up. And that at least is, again, very weird dynamic here. And the fact that Frank does end up getting genuinely pissed off here and starts yelling at Sam in a spot where Shane says that he's so mean, which is, again, funny coming from Shane. But I do feel like this is a spot where, and the show portrays this as, again, he's going back to his old ways, when I don't feel like he actually did anything that bad here. I feel like this is more so just, again, genuine frustration at the fact that you're really falling out of it, and again, just him just wanting to motivate Sam into continuing going. After all, obviously, again, it did give us a little glimpse of Frank that we kind of knew back in the day. I didn't feel like it was to the extreme to where none of this was like completely unwarranted, especially considering Sam actually seemingly takes this like well. I mean, obviously she herself is struggling here and like collapsing at points, but it's still a spot where she essentially gets what she wanted from Frank in that last episode. Again, him motivating her no matter what. I didn't feel like there was anything too bad going on here. But also weirdly, the challenge, they do add a time limit here that seemed actually relatively tight, to where we do see Frank and Sam and Melissa and Nicole not come particularly close to finishing, for both of them end up getting 0 points by the end, which essentially ends up dooming them coming into the final checkpoint, with them being so far behind that they can't catch up. While Devon and Shane and Adam and Steve end up being extremely close here, literally to the point where Adam and Steve are actually closer to finishing coming into their final trip, only for Devon and Shane to actually return first and end up pulling out the win, which was a pretty interesting result there, as it does take us to the final checkpoint with them literally being tied, leading to the final checkpoint, which was them balancing out a scale, which was really lame. Like, this was so bad. Like, I feel like the other one should have been the final checkpoint. Yeah, at least make it something like very physical if you are going to do a physical challenge. Like, why just make it a final like puzzle-based thing here? And I guess like there's a level of coordination involved here, and obviously you having to work with your partner, figure out the right places on the scale. But again, like I felt like the other task was a lot more interesting as a final task, where this just came off pretty lame. But it ultimately is, again, essentially a 2-horse race here between Devon and Shane and Steve and Adam. But TJ really trying to hype up the fact that like never give up, as you never know what will happen. Like, specifically like talking to Frank and Sam and Melissa and Nicole, when it's like they're literally in a spot where they can't win. You can only win 4 points here. Again, they can't win. Now, again, I did think that was going to maybe lead up to this, them saying, oh, maybe this is worth double the points. But no, that never happened. So again, yeah, they just legitimately are screwed here. Now, again, they are fighting for third place, though even then, not really, as obviously we see Devon and Shane and Adam and Steve finish first, to where by that point, really just Frank and Sam just need to finish, and they just automatically come in third place, where even that wasn't that suspenseful, to where, again, all this was just not particularly interesting from that point of view. Though we do get a very tight finish for first, where the show portrays it as if it's literally a second away, which to me didn't really feel genuine. It felt like there's probably a bigger gap, yet they were just trying to hype it up a bit more that was closer for the sake of TV, where it felt like Shane and Devon were pretty content in the fact that they were coming in second by the time of the actual winner reveal. But ultimately, it turns out that Adam and Steve win. Not particularly shocking, as again, this was really their season. And considering how under-edited Shane and Devon were earlier on in the season, again, I think edit-wise, I would have expected Adam and Steve to win here. And again, I think it's a satisfying win. Obviously, the fact that they won 5 eliminations, a few more dailies, again, just for such a dominant force on this season. It also had like a really interesting storyline coming out of the previous season, to where, again, I think their win here was fairly satisfying, to where, while again, Devon and Shane would have also been fun winners, especially from a more meta perspective based on their history on the challenge as a whole, I did feel like for this specific season, the Adam and Steve storyline was definitely a lot more interesting. But that's not the end just yet, because TJ calls over Adam and Steve, saying they have one more decision to make, which clearly this is going to be something involving stealing the money, as has been alluded to for a while. Though I will say I was very confused at why they handled it this way, and really from a lot of facets. First, in the fact that I did expect them to do this for every team, not just the winners. That's what happened back in Challenge Rivals 3. So while they didn't do that in Final Reckoning, that's because in Final Reckoning, only one team got any money, to where I felt like here I was fully expecting it to be for every team. And through that, again, it makes that setup of the Shane Devon relationship, the fact that we got Shane saying so many times, I'm going to make sure she doesn't get any money, like it made all that content very irrelevant, which was strange. But also, even beyond that, just the way they handled this in general is very strange. The fact that it's not even just a simple decision of split or steal, it's more of a prisoner's dilemma. But even then, not really, because it's not even like they themselves are picking if they split or steal. They're supposed to be deciding what they think their opponent would do, which in matching what each other said there, to where, again, like, why is that matter? Like, all this was just very strange. Like, I really do not understand what they were going for here, where it just should have been straight up like, are you going to split or steal? Like, that is the basic decision to be made. Like, why make it more convoluted by making it what you think your partner will do? But either way, I didn't feel like there was much suspense here what was going to happen, especially by the way it was edited. It felt pretty clear that neither were going to steal, as Adam himself even says here that they even talked about it beforehand, that neither were going to steal the money, to where, again, not shocking that we get the result and both decide to split the money. Though we get TJ doing this like weird fake out of him saying that Steve took a while and then picked up the steal card and then threw it away. It's like, okay, cool. Which again just felt like a ridiculous way of him trying to add tension to something that really just had none. But again, a satisfying ending to see Adam and Steve win here. And I thought we got a cool little final moment of the show here. A moment of Adam essentially proposing to Avery through his confessional, where, again, I know obviously since then they have gotten engaged. Where, again, I thought that was a nice little moment there. Now, I don't know if Adam was literally waiting all this time to propose. And it's about where, again, this was filmed like, what, almost a year ago? So again, he's just been like sitting on his hands to propose until then. But still, again, a cool little way to end this season here. But again, before wrapping up the video, I do want to talk briefly about the finalists here. Starting it off with Melissa and Nicole. And Melissa and Nicole do end up having this very strange dynamic on the season where we do see Nicole talking about at the end how they're like siblings now, which is like, is that the way you treat your sibling? Where, again, like the fact that they were like clearly hooking up and Nicole had a girlfriend at home. Again, all that just made this like such a weird dynamic in play here. Though I did think they made for fun enough TV. Again, Melissa getting very frustrated. Nicole constantly made for fun TV. The fact that where while I think we've probably seen what we're going to get from Nicole at this point to where, again, she's just a solid competitor and I'll make it to the final and just probably never win. I feel like Melissa still showed that, again, she still does have some legs here in providing for some fun TV, though it did feel like she got one of the quieter edits of the season. But next, I'm moving on to Frank and Sam. And again, I was so excited to see Frank back. And I really did like how their season played out here. While obviously, again, Frank being paired up with Sam was essentially a death sentence from the very beginning. I do think Frank made the most of it, and I do think it led to a really interesting storyline between him and Sam. Well, also, it led to Frank playing the game in a very interesting way. Again, him having to play this more mastermind sort of game and really playing that up in the edit. Again, I thought made for a lot of fun TV. Again, I did really like this like very Big Brother style of gameplay that we saw from Frank. That is part of the reason why I ended up liking this season as much as I did. So Frank is definitely someone that I fully would love to see back, become a mainstay on the challenge again, with this season just really emphasizing how much he hasn't really lost a step. And from Sam's perspective, again, she was fine here. Again, I thought she was a likable enough presence. I did like her development with Frank, though realistically, obviously, again, just kind of got overshadowed by Frank in the edit. But again, I did think their dynamic in particular was pretty interesting here. Next, we move on to Da'Vonne and Shane. And as I mentioned before, I did feel like they were severely under-edited early on, which was very disappointing, considering, again, I was very excited for the return of both of them. And while Da'Vonne is someone that, again, don't know if she needed to be on All-Stars in particular, I also don't think she would have come back for a non-All-Star season. And again, to see her have her final season here, again, she did declare this as retirement. I think by the end was fun. Again, she definitely got a lot more focus in these last few episodes, and it was more Da'Vonne that we're kind of used to. Oh, well, Shane is someone that, again, I've been wanting back for a while. Happy he finally got a chance to come back. And again, he did provide his fair share of drama. Again, him fighting with Frank was really interesting to see. And in general, again, I thought both of them ended up being really good TV. The problem is that obviously they just weren't really on the show until like halfway through. But again, I was very happy to see them both make a final as well. Again, the first final for both of them. And based on what we're shown, again, coming 1 second away from pulling out the win here, again, is pretty insane to where, again, I thought in general, they had a pretty solid run this season. Both of which, again, people I would like to see back. If they can. Again, Da'Vonne from the fact that will she say yes, and Shane from the fact that they just don't make him an alternate like on Challenge 41. But with that, we then move on to the winners and Adam and Steve. And for me, I thought this was like, again, the perfect ending for this season. Adam and Steve, I thought were again, this really interesting team on this season. One that, and their rivalry was like just a very strange one. The fact that like Adam was still extremely bitter while Steve just didn't think anything of it. And in general, I feel like they are like really just the perfect winners for an all-star season. Again, for Challenge All-Stars, supposed to be representing the old school of the challenge. I feel like both of them are obviously very indicative of that. While obviously having like, again, an insane track record on this season. Again, winning some sort of challenge during almost every round of the game. Having a pretty rocky final, but still ultimately pulling out the win there. Again, I did feel like this is just a very solid season for them. Where, again, I think as long as All-Stars ends up going for, I would not be opposed to see Adam back over and over and over again. Even on the mainline show, I would not be opposed to giving him a shot there and seeing how he holds up. Well, Steve is someone that I've always very much liked. I was happy to see him come back for All-Stars 4 and like actually have a pretty good run there, and obviously him pulling out the win now. So again, I think Steve is a very good competitor. Also very likable presence. Now again, not the most riveting TV. To where while he does have some like quirky segments at points, for the most part, again, he is kind of bland, but he's just a very likable guy and someone that, again, is very good at challenges. And also, again, fills the old school moniker to where, again, I think in general, would not be that opposed to seeing Steve back, especially for All-Stars in particular. And in general, again, very satisfying outcome to the season, with him really dominating in challenges pretty much from beginning to end. But with that, again, that's the end of the challenge, All-Stars Rivals. And in general, again, I really like this season. I thought this was, again, potentially the best challenge season since War of the Worlds 2, I think one of the best challenge seasons in years. I think it's a season that did live up to the Challenge All-Stars moniker, not necessarily, again, in terms of casting, where I think there are definitely some casting choices that are very questionable, but more so in terms of tone. I feel like this just very much felt like a kind of middle school challenge season, both in terms of the competitions that they were using, but also in terms of how much drama we had, the big swings we saw being made, to where, again, it just felt very opposed to what we get from modern challenge. And I felt like that was very refreshing to see here. For a while at this point, again, I'm unsure if All-Stars will continue. I feel like if it does, this was definitely a good sign for the trajectory of the show, to where while we've had, again, glimmers of this, like, again, drama and kind of old school challenge vibes from the previous All-Star seasons, I feel like this is the one that finally got it all together. So again, I thought this was a genuinely great season of the show, which again is just so opposed to what we get in the modern day. And with that, again, that is my review of the Challenge All-Stars Rivals. Now, straight up, even if we do get a season 6, I'm not 100% locked in on doing a video on it. I will say, again, like with Challenge All-Stars in particular, I was actually willing to give it up on All-Stars 4. The only reason I did this video at all was simply because of how good the season was lined up to be. And again, it didn't disappoint. So again, even if there is an All-Star 6, again, I would say don't expect a review of it, but I wouldn't like completely rule it out. Though again, obviously Challenge 41 will be coming at some point. I will probably still do a review of Mainline Challenge, at least for now. So stay tuned for that. Outside that, obviously still the main focus of the channel is still going to be around Survivor and Big Brother. Like obviously we got Survivor 48 coming up, AU vs. the World eventually. Obviously Amazing Race is currently airing. I'll be doing a video on that. And obviously outside that, just the typical store content. So stay tuned for all those things. But for now, that's the video. Thank you for watching.